вітаю на шовковім полі, я полкового знамена, дивлюсь на нього я востаннє, у нез'ясованій журбі, всю кров мою всі скидання, воно вібрало у собі.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лафтем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні. У нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, та вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and welcome back to day 277 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on not just the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, but the past 72 hours of the war in Ukraine after we've come back from a 2-day break, the first one ever in channel history, and I gotta tell you, it was actually incredibly nice. We were able to sit back for a little bit, recharge, and we are back at it again, and we're back covering the news. I hope all of our American viewers had a great Thanksgiving. I hope the rest of y'all, if you're not an American, didn't have a Thanksgiving, just had a fun 2-day break. I've seen a lot of y'all saying that y'all had enforced withdrawals, but we are back, and we will be covering the news tonight. Now, another thing that I was wanting to say is that it was really interesting to not run this stream for 2 days. It's not going to become normal. We're going to keep running this every single day of the week except for Mondays. But it
feels like a part of our lives was missing, to be totally honest.
It was, because, you know, like usually I sit here and I start work at this stuff at around 5:30, and then I would sit down here at 5:30, and, you know, I'm like ingrained in my head because I do this so much that I should be working on this, and then I just sit there and I do nothing. So it's kind of weird in a way, because it's like a blessing and a curse, you know? You gotta sit there and rest a little bit, but at the same time, it felt like you ought to be doing something, you know? So that was really weird. But anyways, it's time to get right into the news. And some of y'all may have noticed tonight that we've actually put up a little bit of an interesting title, that Ukraine is stopping Russian assaults. And before we actually get into any of the clips today, I'm actually going to go over the Frontline news first, and then we're going to go over the clips to support it, because I thought that might be a little bit of a better format to work with. So we're going to hop over to Deep State UA, and one thing that's incredibly interesting is that if we go over the past 72 hours, and here's 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, 72 hours ago, you can see that there is pretty much absolutely no change on the front line whatsoever. That is not to say, however, that the Russians have not been conducting new pushes. For example, we have heard of a new push in the Crimea area, with the Russians trying to push back towards this reservoir and retake it, so that way there's more of a natural barrier in between them and the Ukrainians would be pushed a little bit farther away from the ridgeline. This has appeared to be entirely unsuccessful, and not only at that, but the attacking force that the Russians have put into this is incredibly small. We assume, based off of the actual strength of the attack, and from what we've heard, it's only about 3 to 4 BTGs in size. So it may as well not even be a full-on assault. It seems to be more so of a probing attack. Meanwhile, down in Bakhmut, we can hear again that the Russians apparently are trying a brand new offensive after their failed offensive that cost 8,000 dead and tens of thousands wounded. They're trying a new one, but once again, it is with reduced numbers. Apparently, only several BTGs are conducting an assault in the Bakhmut area, and they are facing practically a brick wall. The Russians are not making any advances anywhere. We've also seen that in Avdiivka, for instance, the Russians are pushing down here as well, once again with an incredibly small fighting force. We don't really know what's up with Russia now using incredibly small fighting forces. One of the assumptions that I have made is that it must be because of the lack of supplies, and so any offensives have to be scaled back heavily in size, because there's really no way to field large, I guess you could say, movements of BTGs around the front anymore, because the supply lines probably aren't sufficient enough to keep that going, and there's probably not enough winter gear to keep these people from freezing to death. But it's been incredibly odd to see. It's just, it isn't making much sense to me. And one thing that I'm thinking is that all of these attacks are diversionary tactics, probably for another offensive to begin further in the south around the area of Kyiv, because that is the only place that we haven't seen the Russians moving. And considering that every other area of the front line now has a very small skirmish going on it, pretty much all the way from the northeast to about in the Donetsk area, that's about as far as it goes. The only area that's silent is this area right here. And there could be some ground possibly made by the Russians. Kyiv is a major Ukrainian supply line in this area, but I don't see them making any kind of ground or any kind of advantage. We've already seen them throw massive amounts of soldiers into the Volodar and Bakhmut area for an entirety of a month and a half and make absolutely no progress at all. And so it would make no sense for them to be committing a decent amount of resources and effort, because think about it again. If all three of these offensives, one in the northeast, one near Bakhmut, and one near Avdiivka, are all using about 3 to 4 BTGs each, that is about 12 BTGs that require almost a complete top-up of supplies every single day. day. And so that is consuming a massive amount, hundreds of supply trucks each and every day to keep these small skirmishes running. And so the idea that a entirely, I guess you could say, brand new and major offensive would begin in the south near Kyiv is almost out of the question. The supply lines probably aren't even there, and we also know that the southern front near Zaporizhia has the smallest amount of, I guess you could say, modern equipment there is. Mostly, the Russians have been reinforcing the Zaporizhia line with older equipment like T-62Ms and soldiers equipped with older ballistic protection gear and also older helmets, just to name a few things that the soldiers are lacking on. So I don't really think there would be a lot of potential there. However, there is potential in the other direction, but we're not going to go into that too much, and we're also going to be going over each part of the front in detail, but I thought I would give a much better and more adept summary and description of what the frontline activity is looking like today. But let's get right into the location unknowns, starting off on day 275, which is in green, and then we're going to move our way all the way over to day 277. And so starting off, we've seen some Russian mines go up again, because the Russians never learn. Never have they learned in history that putting a large amount of mines in the wide open is a terrible idea. And so it happened again. So let's watch this video. When you see all the mines scattered around, it's a very efficient supply depot. You can literally just drive a truck right by this thing and pick them up off the side of the road like some kind of wild berries. But the Ukrainians are about to put this all up in a puff of smoke with a very small bomblet. And there goes the mines.
A small one?
Yeah, it was pretty small. But there goes the mines, and now it's nothing more than a smoldering crater in the ground, and it looks like it got them all, maybe save like one or two of them. It got almost all of them. So once again, the Russians have lost a decent amount of mines in the middle of nowhere that they were probably going to use if they ever retreated, so that way the Ukrainians would have some nasty tricks that they would be running into, but of course, they're not going to have that anymore. The mines are gone, and it also looks like it took some of the road with it, perhaps. But moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, we can also see a Ukrainian Humvee laying into the Russians, and this was also incredibly cool, because we actually got to see the hand crank on the turret on top of a Humvee in action. We rarely ever get to see this, especially in the Ukraine war, and so let's watch the clip, and let's see this guy hand cranking his turret around, because it's incredibly cool. When you see him here firing the machine gun, and when you see him cranking the turret around, and this is incredibly interesting because many people think that a Humvee's, I guess you could say, basket turret at the top, you can just slide it around with a machine gun. You grab onto the machine gun handles and you just slide the thing around. But it's actually much like an early World War II tank turret for a really light tank. You have to hand crank that thing around. And that's really interesting to see. We rarely ever get to see that on film, but you can see it right here. So this guy's doing a little bit of multitasking.
Does it take a lot of strength to move it?
Nah, it doesn't. It's very easy. It's like hand cranking a window. So you just like spin the thing around and it just moves. And with that, that's the end of the video, but a really interesting look at a Ukrainian Humvee gunner doing a little bit of his own work and also multitasking by cranking that turret and also firing the machine gun as well. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, the last one for day 275, where we can see Ukrainian HIMARS firing at night. And so here's the video. It's a really cool one. We hear the missiles already firing. You see the HIMARS. It almost, for some reason, it's like I didn't see it right here. And I think it's because it's shrouded in smoke. But I did not see that HIMARS until the second shot was fired.
Хаймерс, блядь.
See it continuing to fire its missiles. And we now see them packing up the launcher immediately, and they're getting ready to move out. The HIMARS used to be an incredibly rare MLRS to see on the front lines. It is the best MLRS that the Ukrainians have, maybe even the best artillery piece the Ukrainians currently have. The only other vehicle that can contend with this one in terms of its accuracy and its firepower would be an M270 Mars, but we don't see a lot of those on the front line. As far as we know, there may only be around 8 to 12 of them in the entirety of Ukraine, while there's about 40 or so. We haven't really been able to run across an exact number lately, but there's around 40 HIMARS at this point traveling around Ukraine and firing off their missiles. And so it's very interesting to think that a site like this has started to become commonplace in Ukraine. And not only that, the HIMARS are still one of the game-changing, I guess you could say, pieces of foreign equipment that has really turned the war around in Ukraine's favor, along with the M777. If you could attribute just two weapon systems from the West for the successes that Ukraine has started to have over the past few months, it would both be the M777 for the frontline artillery fire that largely helps out the infantry to unbelievable degrees due to its accuracy and also its range, and the HIMARS as well for hitting even further behind the lines and making sure that the frontline units that the M777 is hitting are even worse off than they would have been before. And so it's really neat to see one of these HIMARS in operation again. We get to see them a lot now. They're kind of a common sight, but you got to remember, while they're common now, and we've all kind of gotten used to the sight of them, this is truly a game-changing weapon. And it also makes you think, if the U.S. went to war, and this was the majority of the, I guess you could say, MLRS artillery we would be using, what would a war actually look like with almost your entire MLRS battery consisting of these things, or M270s, which carry twice the amount of missiles? It's a really interesting idea. But anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on from the day 275 location unknown news, and we're now going to be moving into day 276. Starting off with an interesting little look at a Ukrainian drone doing some carpet bombletting. This is a very rare sight to see. We rarely ever see it out of sight of, I guess you could say, infrared or night vision. And we can see right here that this one dropped 2 bomblets at the same time. We don't know how the cradle was set up on this drone, but it's really bizarre to see this. You never ever see them dropping 2 at a time. It's usually just single bomblets, one after the other. But we see that both of them were pretty accurate, landing within feet of each other, and it looks like they may have hit a Russian trench, which we can see right on the side of this road, and of course, in typical Russian fashion, going in a straight line all the way down the side of the road. We didn't get to see if there were any Russian soldiers that ended up going to sleep in this video, and so for that reason, we can't confirm any casualties, but one thing we can say is that the bomblets were actually quite accurate, especially for a drone moving at speed across the field, not sitting stationary. Also, just another thing, sometimes some people think that, and I was wanting to explain this real quick because I've said sleeping, and I was like, some viewers may not have ever gotten this explanation, but the reason why we say things like Russians are sleeping, they're taking naps, and other things like that, is because of YouTube's community guidelines. We really can't get into descriptive detail about some of the things that show up on video. And so when, I guess you could say, I guess you could say the termination of a soldier comes to being, we can't really say what, it's just plain and frank. So we have to use other terms like the soldier went to sleep, they're taking a nap, or something similar. And also, I did see on one of our, I think it was the last stream we ran before we went on to our Thanksgiving break, some people said that there was a Ukrainian soldier that had something happen to him in a video, and I can't really say it. If y'all see it, I'm seeing it as well, but sometimes we can't really say stuff like that, frankly, because we could get in a decent amount of trouble if someone flags a video and then says, hey, like that's, they said this and you could see it in the video, then YouTube will come in and break our kneecaps. So we have to say things in other ways so that way we don't get in a large amount of trouble. So I hope y'all understand that. Like just in case if none of y'all ever heard me say that before and always wondered why I was using like little quip quos and stuff to explain what's happening to people, that's really the reason why. It's not always to make fun or joke of the situation. Usually it's to get around community guidelines. But anyways, with that, we're now moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that some guys went for a wild ride in Mi-24, and this was the newest angle that we've ever seen from an Ukrainian Mi-24. Usually whenever we see this footage, we're seeing it from the gunner's perspective, and just in case y'all don't know, this is also something really cool about Mi-24s, and I guess you could say helicopters in general, is that when you look at these helicopters, usually a helicopter, an attack one, has 2 pilots. not really pilots. The front one is the gunner, and the rear one is the pilot himself. And, you know, a lot of people always think, well, why isn't it the other way around? Why isn't the pilot sitting in the front and the gunner sitting in the back? And that's because the gunner needs the best field of vision to be able to fire off the weaponry and also see where they're going. The pilot really just needs to have a general idea of where they are. So what's really interesting is that we're always looking at the camera footage from the gunner's perspective, but it's his perspective, I guess you could say, in his point of view, where he's looking. This time, the camera was actually turned around so we could see the internal workings of the gunner's cockpit while they're firing off the unguided rockets. And it's a really cool look, considering we've never seen this before. And so, here's the video. And also, real quick, let me unmute it because there's no music in this one. And let me see if I can get the graphics quality a little bit better. See the helicopter tilting up. They fire off the unguided rockets, and now the helicopter is tilting back down, hitting the ground, and I think we can see the flares back there. And this is just bizarre to see, because when you really see it from this point of view, it honestly just looks like this guy's riding in a cherry picker bucket, you know, like an electrical guy would be working in, and he's just firing off rockets and stuff from inside of it.
And what about that beard too?
Yeah, I mean, like, the beard is rocking it. I mean, like, the guy looks like a straight up Viking or something with that beard.
Yes, I saw Buddy just say that too, so he was on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I mean, like this guy looks like he just came straight from Norway, and he's about to tell you about Harald Hardrada, who united all of the Scandinavian people. But it's just bizarre to see it this way, because we never see the videos from this light. It's always from his point of view, so it's, you know, it's like the camera is where his head would be. We never see it looking back at him, and it's just so weird, because it really is just these guys riding around in aluminum buckets with a large rotor behind their heads and firing off rockets miles away into the distance. So it's just really weird to look at it this way. And also to see this guy, like, pretty much acting like he's riding in a bucket. Like, you can see him, like, leaning to upright himself as the helicopter's in the turn. It's just not what you would imagine, like, riding in one of these helicopters would look like, but it's just still cool nonetheless.
There's actually quite a bit of shake in that cockpit.
There is. Like, you can see, like, the, I believe that's a heads-up display right here that's shaking around. I mean, the guy's shaking. Everything's shaking.
Is that normal?
I believe it is normal. We'd have to look at all kinds of MI-24 footage, probably looking at the gunner or the pilot to see if that's normal, but I think it is, because you gotta imagine, the torque in those helicopter rotor blades is immense, and I'm sure that they would shake a helicopter normally, kind of like how a jet, we've flown on a jet before, they kind of like vibrate the whole time, like a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like the same principle. But let us know if you're a helicopter pilot, and I know that we have some in here. If y'all have ridden in a helicopter before, is that normal for them to shake a little bit like that, or is it supposed to be just a smooth flight all around? Because that's actually kind of interesting.
Sounds like the next poll question too.
That would actually be pretty cool to ask. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of location unknown news. And also, sorry everyone, before stream, I was actually looking at New York City, specifically Central Park. So the Google Maps is here. I'm going to move that over to Ukraine real quick. But let me go back to here, and we're now going to be moving on into day 277's news, where we've also seen some more interesting occurrences, like this near miss. A Ukrainian tank, two of them were moving in a column down a road, and a Russian ATGM, it looked like a Hornet, flew right over this tank, missing it just by feet. And so, here's the video. We see the tank moving forward down this partially muddy road. It's not the muddiest that we've seen today. There's been a lot worse. And right there, if you heard that sound, you just heard death pass these guys by several yards. And we're about to watch the slow-mo of this video, right here. So you can see it going frame by frame as the tank's moving forward. And right there, you see that little black dot? That is a Hornet's ATGM that's flying right in front of them just by about 12 yards.
Dang.
There we go. They zoomed in on it and paused the frame. You can see it right there. And that's the sound that they heard. And of course, it's kind of funny to think, this thing, as far as I recall, a Hornets is wire guided. So let me go back and take a look at that real quick. Is a Hornets wire guided? see. So it's laser guided, actually. So it doesn't even get the blame of maybe the wire snagging on something and they lose the, I guess you could say, the guidance of the missile. The Kornets is laser guided, which means, and I'll show a Kornets, Kornets ATGM. This thing right here is kind of like a Stugna, but about a decade or two behind, because the operator actually has to sit right under the launcher with a small little scope, and that scope has a laser in it, and it guides that Kornets missile that you see leaving the tube right there to its target. Somehow, even with it being laser guided, which cuts out the chance of the wire, like a tow would be, getting snagged and losing guidance of the missile that way, this thing is actually being guided by the operator, and somehow he didn't guide the laser onto the tank. It apparently was guided onto something in the background farther away, and so this missile just flew over everything harmlessly, and the Ukrainian tankers got a pretty good indication of where the Russian AT units were. So all in all, it's probably not a good day for the Russians. And we now see this tank looking into the distance where the Kornets may have come from. And they're continuing to advance, but oh, whoa, wait a minute. Actually, they're not continuing to advance. I think they may have just taken out the Kornets ATGM position right there. And we can see them firing way into the distance, because apparently there may be some Russians just close to the road, maybe 200 yards away, and the Kornets may have been about a mile away, back on that hill that we're seeing right there at the end of the video. But pretty wild to see. It is also funny to see that somehow, something as simple as just keeping a laser pointed directly at a tank is beyond a Russian ATGM crew. It's honestly unbelievable. That's like missing with a Stugna. And it's not even, it's impossible to think of how inept a soldier must be to miss with something like this. And you know, and a lot of people may say that these things may be difficult to use, but these things, these ATGM weapons and a lot of equipment in the military is made as simple to use as possible, so that way training times can be a lot lower, and it can still, and it can be used quite easily under stress. Because you got to remember, there's always a high level of stress in a combat situation, in a fight, and so you've got to make things as easy to do as possible. And somehow, a goofball like this guy right here fired a Kornets with a laser guider, so it guides itself to the target as long as you're looking at it, and he missed by a pretty good distance. It was actually not that close. It was pretty good ways away. But with that, that's the end of that little clip, and I hope y'all all have a good laugh at whoever fired that missile, because due to his ineptitude, this Ukrainian tank didn't even get close to being hit. It was about 12 yards off or so. And so with that, now that I've changed about the distance away this missile was fired about 3 or 4 times in explaining this, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Mad Max recoilless buggy. And y'all may actually notice where this is from. This is the thumbnail for tonight's stream.
Oh.
And is that cool or what? This was really cool. I had to make it tonight's thumbnail because it was the coolest picture I'd seen of one of these in action, and it certainly is neat. I believe that is an SPG-9 that they've mounted on top of this buggy, and you can also see one of the recoilless shells.
No, I'm not gonna lie. For a split second, I thought maybe that was the exhaust, but then I saw the missile shooting out front. That would be really cool if that was the exhaust. That would be a hell of a tune.
I mean, dude, imagine, good lord, imagine a buggy like this on nitrous.
Oh, man. There's actually, I think there is one. I think Can-Am makes a buggy like that on nitrous.
Man, I would be scared to see what the Ukrainians could do with a nitrous-powered buggy. Like, that thing would just be, dude, that thing would be ripping across the field so quickly that the suspension wouldn't even have time to react to, like divots in the ground. You would pretty much just be gliding across the surface, probably wrecking the suspension in the meantime, but man. And we can also see a close-up here of this Ukrainian gunner talking on a radio, once again with the SPG-9, and then we have a last picture right here of, I guess, the cart driver and maybe the another cart crew member sitting on the side of the road as the gunner fires off the SPG again. It is just incredibly bizarre to see that the Toyota Hiluxes, which the origin of the technical, because this thing is pretty much just a glorified technical, the origin of the technical was actually found in Chad, in Africa of all places, in the late 70s, and that's actually how we got our hands on an Mi-24 in the United States, but that's a whole other story for a whole other time. But it went from a Toyota Hilux, and I gotta pull this up, Toyota Hilux Technical. it went from this, which is pretty cheap. It's
It's
pretty,
battle proven though. You got to admit.
it is battle proven, and the United States actually watched the nation of Chad in this war. It was a civil war, and they watched how effective the technicals were because they moved so quickly. No one really had time to destroy them, and so they were able to cause massive amounts of damage at airfields and bases because they could just move from place to place so quickly. They're incredibly effective, and we can see that the Ukrainians have taken this incredibly effective strategy of using technicals like this, and they've now modified it even further and made it far more efficient by mounting these weapons, like we've seen some machine guns mounted onto buggies, but this one isn't using a machine gun, it's using an SPG-9, but they've now mounted it onto a buggy, which can probably traverse the landscape a lot quicker. They're a lot cheaper and easier to produce, and not only that, but they're efficient all around. I mean, like, the cost of them, the ability for them to travel over all kinds of terrain, probably even terrain that the Toyota Hilux couldn't travel over, and they've taken this idea and they've made it into the epitome of efficiency. And while it's cheap, and and I'm saying it's cheap, and it is cheap, and it is pretty, I guess you could say, primitive in a way, but it's still incredibly effective, and we haven't really seen the Russians come up with a proper defense against raids, either by Humvees or from carts yet. And so it looks like they've really taken the technical aspect of a Toyota Hilux, and they've now equipped it onto a buggy, which is doing a whole lot better of a job. And so with that, once again, really cool to see these pictures, and it's now time for us to move into probably the most interesting segment of the day, because I've got news for y'all. The Russians are going to reach 100,000 dead before we even get to Christmas at this rate. So let's go to Kyiv Independent, and let's check out the casualty report. We can see again that while the Russians are doing probing attacks, it is showing that they're using a much smaller amount of units, about 3 to 4 BTGs in each probing attack on each part of the front. We can see that they've only lost 4 armored personnel carriers and 2 tanks, but they've also lost 560 troops again today, and that is just killed. That is not including wounded. If we wanted to include the wounded, we can go to -rus.com, which was just a great source, and I thank y'all so much for showing us this, because it has a pretty good approximation of the wounded and killed. And according to -Rus, there's around 2,240 Russian soldiers that were once again knocked out of frontline service today. That means that nearly 3 BTGs worth of strength was depleted just today again. Once again, another 540 killed, and about, I mean, like, hell, if we subtract 540 from 2,200, we're seeing about 1,700 to 1,600 Russian soldiers wounded. We don't really know how those numbers are being corroborated, but it's about the best guess and figure we have. I believe it's a wounded to kill ratio of about 3 or 4 to 1, so it's pretty accurate. It is a little bit on the high end, though. But imagine that, another 3 BTGs of combat strength depleted over 24 hours. And that doesn't seem like a lot on the surface, considering that Russia has 170 BTGs to work with, and BTGs don't make up the entirety of their fighting force. There are also brigade-level forces that do not have BTGs in them that exist. But still, you've got to imagine the stress and rigors that this is having on the Russian, I guess you could say, supply line in general, just in terms of supplying bodies and also removing bodies. Because one thing that's not really talked about a lot, and I haven't talked about it a lot either or even considered this, is that wounded soldiers require a lot more effort than dead ones. Dead ones, Russians just leave those behind. We've seen hundreds of them, and I've seen dozens of them getting loaded into trucks, off the side of the road because they just got obliterated by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are cleaning them up. But one thing that I never talk about is the wounded. And considering that around 1,600 to 1,700 Russian soldiers were wounded alone today, you have to imagine how difficult that is to deal with these soldiers. And I'm sure a lot of them really aren't being dealt with. You have to find an ambulance, and I'm assuming that the best Russian ambulance can probably hold 2 to 4 of these soldiers. Or you could load them into a supply truck, either way, and a supply truck can probably hold about 6 of them. And so let's just say that the average Russian transport can probably hold, on a liberal level, around 4 wounded soldiers per vehicle. And so we take 1,600 and we divide that by 4, and that means that each day there are about 400 Russian vehicles of varying kinds, whether it be an ambulance or a supply truck, that is needed to evacuate the wounded alone. That's just to get the wounded out of there. Not only that, but then the Russians have to take even more supply trucks, to transport fresh soldiers and fresh replenishments to these BTGs that have been wiped out towards the front lines to then keep it going. So that's probably another additional. It's not going to be as many as the wounded, because the wounded have to lie flat on a stretcher, so they take up a lot more space. A normal Russian supply truck could probably carry about 15 to 20 soldiers apiece. And so then you're looking at, let's see here, 2,240 soldiers lost a day. So 2,240, and we divide that by about 15. That means that a whole other 150 supply vehicles are needed per day to bring in replenishments and reinforcements to the front line to replace all of the combat attrition, the combat casualties that have happened for that day. And so in total, 600 supply trucks and ambulances are needed each and every day by the Russian army to move the wounded and maybe sometimes the dead off the front lines and then bring in brand new replacements. And that is something that I have never actually thought about before, Matthew, as a strain on the logistics forces of the Russian army. This whole entire time, I've only considered the supply side of things. How much ammunition, how much fuel, and maybe how many parts and spare equipment will these BTGs need to keep running. But I have never considered that it's a whole other level of a Russian supply line to also evacuate the wounded, maybe the dead occasionally, and then also pump in new soldiers to that front line.
Yeah, it seems like it's a huge burden.
It is. It's a massive burden, especially considering that the Russian army started off with 4,000 supply vehicles. If we're going with this number, that's probably close to accurate. It may be off by several dozen vehicles, more or less, but about 550 vehicles per day. And the Russians entered the war with 4,000 supply trucks that were not connected to a BTG just to do supply work. That means that each and every day, the wounded and dead, and also the replacement of their forces that they've lost as casualties, is taking up around 14% of their original supply line's capacity. We have no idea what the amount of supply vehicles they have is now, but it's still a massive drain. The only thing we can assume is that the supply lines have gotten weaker over the war. We don't know by how much. So let's say that they now only have about 3,200 supply vehicles, and we know that they've lost thousands. Of course, according to the casualty report here, they have lost in total almost 4,400 supply vehicles, but they're probably commandeering a massive load of civilian vehicles to replace that the attrition rate of their supply trucks. So let's say that they have about 3,000 at this point operating across the entirety of the front line. So 550 divided by 3,000 means that evacuating the wounded and bringing in replacements is taking up nearly 18% of their supply line capacity just to keep the front line, I guess you could say, manned at the same figure or the same number, and also to move out wounded, because of course, it's only reasonable to assume that the Russians are probably moving out a decent amount of the wounded. Not all of them, but most of them. And so this is something I've never even considered before, and this is the first time I was looking at that number, and I was like, man, it's like they're having to take a lot of these soldiers back to Russia alive. You know, they're not in fighting condition anymore, but they have to go somewhere. And so how much is that taking up? And it's taking up such a large amount that that's probably the reason why the Russians are having a hard time catching up with providing soldiers with equipment at all, because they're having to take care of these wounded and dying soldiers first, or they have to make the decision to let them die and probably lower the unit's morale significantly to then try and supply them with any kind of equipment or provisions at all. And so this is actually making the Russian logistical situation look a lot more abysmal.
Interesting.
And so now that I've had Matthew's confirmation that is in fact interesting, we're now going to be going through the rest of the casualty report. And so we can see that, of course, according to minusrus.com, which is using, I'm supposing, estimated figures, although the daily losses are apparently gotten from the Kyiv Independent and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, we can see that the Russians have also lost 88% of their operational armored force that they had before the war. 88%. That means that most of the vehicles and tanks that we're going to be seeing on the front lines at this point are going to be brought out of storage. Most likely T-62Ms or very old versions of the T-72 or the T-80, which means we'll probably be seeing the T-80B and the T-72A becoming very commonplace on the battlefield. And the most commonplace replacement is the T-62Ms, which are so outdated that when we look at North Korea's armed forces and we see them there, we laugh at them. And that's what the Ukrainians are going to be going up against in terms of armor. We've also seen that they've lost 42.5% of their APCs, another 4 lost a day, which isn't really high. The tank losses and the APC losses are not high whatsoever today. Once again, they are quite low. But still, you can see cumulative, based off of the pre-war numbers of what we had as a good idea of their operational vehicles, it has taken a massive toll, especially on the armored units, the tanks alone. They've lost another artillery piece today, but they have not lost any new aircraft, any new helicopters, or any new ships and boats. But just because they haven't lost these vehicles today doesn't mean that the casualties have already been significant. If you started off in a Russian Air Force squad of Su-27s, that, and, you know, they had, I guess you could say a squad, going off of what a squad should be, which is a group of 4, you would have 4 vehicles in the squad. At this point in the war, if you started off the war with 4 vehicles in the squad, you are now down to 3 in every single squad. So that means, and of course not the entire Russian Air Force is made out of Su-27s. There's a lot of different aircraft in the Russian Air Force, but every single squad of 4 has now been knocked down in size by a whole 1 aircraft. Now there's only 3 aircraft per squad in the entire Russian Air Force. That's also the same for their helicopter force as well, which has taken 27%, I guess you could say, loss rate over the entirety of the war. And so we're now also seeing that for every 4 helicopters to start the war, there's now only 3 of them in the Russian military. And it's once again just laughable to think that, you know, the supposed Russian army, the best in the world, has lost at least a quarter, if not almost 90%, of their major fighting vehicles to a country that at the beginning of this war, most people didn't even know could survive a week. And they've now lost a large part of the, I guess you could say, vehicles and units in their military just from Ukraine. I mean, it's really unbelievable, honestly. And when you think about it, what's even crazier is that they've lost a flagship. And, you know, we're not even talking about the ships and boats. They've lost the Moskva, which was one of their best ships in the Russian Navy, to Bayraktars. You know, like, they're losing everything at this point. And while the casualties aren't high today, we can see that they're definitely not going to be improving anymore because they've lost the majority of their modern and operational vehicles that were hardly even giving them a fighting chance at winning this war. And now that they've lost those, we're going to see that the conditions in the war will only continue to deteriorate further and further until the Russian army is currently a shadow of its former self, even pre-war, but it's going to be a shell of its former self by the time the war comes to an end. I mean, I can't even imagine what the Russian armored force is going to be looking like by the year 2023. It's not going to have any kind of modern main battle tanks in it whatsoever. All of it's going to be pulled out of far eastern Siberian depots, where they have nothing but T-62Ms and maybe even T-55s by that point. So you're going to be looking at a Russia that's actually been chopped down to size, chopped down to what they're economically, I guess you could say, able to do. And so with that, that's the end of the casualty report, and I gotta say, it's looking pretty good for Ukraine, and hopefully we'll see them continue to rack up a large amount of Russian casualties, so that way, hopefully, the Russian units will eventually collapse and come to a stop. Also, another thing, wait a minute, let me go back to minus Rus again real quick. Minus Rus, not minus Russian karaoke, minus Rus. I clicked on the wrong thing. So, we go to this. Here's something else interesting. I just thought about this, and I think y'all all might find this interesting too. Russia mobilized, I believe, 250,000 men in the partial mobilization. At this going rate, in 100 days' time, all of the brand new soldiers that they called up in the partial mobilization will have either been wounded or killed, or they'll have completely replaced the original Russian fighting force, and the Russians will be looking at, in 100 days' time, the exact same situation again, where the manpower in the Russian army will not be large enough and will not be, well, they're not even well-trained enough right now. That's laughable to even say that they would be well-trained. It won't be large enough for them to carry on the war. So, and I'm sorry, everyone, I'm trying to piece this together as I go. This is a massive epiphany to me, just on the losses side. The partial mobilization, if I'm correct, Matthew, was called up about 30... Well, no, wait a minute. We can actually just go to my channel and look, because it would have been the title for the stream that day. So let me go over here, and let's go to my channel and look real quick at all of the live streams. So let me whip this over here on y'all's screen. And let's go back, and let's find the one where we talk about the partial mobilization. Russia abandons heavy losses. Putin declares martial law. Ukraine, let's see, they're running out. Goodbye. Russian strikes in anger. The Kerch Bridge was destroyed. Let's see. Russian Fifth Army. Let's see. Lehman encircled. Let's see. Chaos in Russia. So 2 months ago, it's almost already been 60 days or more since that partial mobilization was called up, which means that in terms of wounded and killed, the amount of Russian soldiers that have been wounded and killed by that point has been so high that there's only about 40 days left until the Russian army is completely depleted the forces that they brought forward in the partial mobilization, and they're now going to need more men again to pump into this war. So at that rate, going off of all of the rough calculations that we've made, and once again, while I'm making these calculations, and it sounds like they're being made with a lot of confidence, take them with a grain of salt because we're working off of the numbers we have, which may not be entirely accurate. They may be showing an increased number of casualties that the Russians are taking. They may actually be a little bit lower, or a lot lower than the Russian casualties, and how much they're actually taking. But going off of these rough estimates, in another 40 days' time, in about a month and a half, the Russian government, Putin, will be posed with the question again if another partial mobilization or a mass mobilization will have to be called up again, because the amount of losses that they've taken is so high and the amount of attrition they're taking is so high that the partial mobilization has only had I guess you could say, a delaying effect on the lack of manpower that they have. And so, man, I mean, I've never even thought about this stuff before, everyone, because I am always focusing on supply lines and getting ammunition to these soldiers and food and winter equipment, but I'm never thinking about the actual manpower side of the logistics situation and how badly that's going. And going off of this, it's going terrible. I would expect that the Russian army will probably collapse within months' time. They'll run out of manpower again in the next month and a half, and we'll probably see them on their dying legs by late spring. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the casualty report, which has been incredibly detailed tonight. I hope you all enjoyed that. And we're now going to be moving on from the location unknowns and on into the actual frontline news, starting off in the northeastern area near Svatove. But before we do, I've actually seen that Maddie's been running some incredibly interesting polls, and a lot of y'all have voted on them. Also, real quick, if I could ask, we don't usually ask this often, but if y'all can hit the like button, that helps out the stream a lot to reach more people. And so if you would like the Enforcer channel to reach more people and the news to be seen by more, make sure to hit the like button and share us around. But real quick, let's get to the polls, because a lot of y'all have had some very interesting votes on these polls. So with that, what do we got, Matthew?
Also, Enforcer, real quick, I just saw somebody mention it. We forgot to plug the merch at the beginning of the stream tonight.
Oh, yeah. So real quick, everyone, if you go to enforcerstore.com, and I forgot to say this, and we're going to say this now. If you go to enforcerstore.com, believe it or not, but every single limited edition item we have ever run before is on the store right now. You've got
Hey, it's Mr. Lunchtime.
You got legends like Mr. Lunchtime making his return. You got the He's Watching You posters back. You got the I Want You for the Lee Spring Army shirts. Professor Mortar, Moscow Mike, the coffee fund, it's all back, and it's going to be back for a limited time. We're going to be running this until tomorrow, about an hour before the stream. So I guess you could, let's see, 10 p.m., so an hour. It would be 9 p.m. Eastern time, or 8 o'clock local time for me, since I'm in the central time zone, that this will be running. And so if you want to support the channel and get something really cool out of it, like I mean, literally, the options are limitless. We have every single limited edition run we have ever run before. The Russian bots.
I gotta admit, the He's Watching You poster and like mug is the coolest thing on the store. Like when I look back at it, I forgot how it looked. That was like really, really cool looking.
It is incredibly cool. Honestly, the favorite ones of mine on this whole store right now would be the He's Watching You stuff. Like everything that He's Watching You is related to, that is incredibly cool. And the I Want You posters, I think those are really cool because you can't even tell that the text font was messed with there. Like it looks like the original Uncle Sam poster.
Yes, I'm so proud of that too, because it took me forever to figure out how to do that.
Honestly, I'm probably going to be... Also, wait a minute. I forgot. There's still more. The LSA hoodies are back.
The Honey Badger merch is back too.
And the Honey Badger merch is back. Everything is back. And it's only going to be back for a small time. After tomorrow, an hour before the stream, all of this stuff will be going off the store except for the original Enforcer merch. So the t-shirt, the mug, the thermos, and the hoodie, and also the stickers. Beyond that, everything else is going to be off the store again. So if you want to support the channel and get something cool for family for Christmas, if they're a fan of the channel and you want to get something for them, this is the moment. Everything's back. You can get anything and everything. And also some stuff that has been channel jokes before and it has been legends. I mean, like, hell, Mr. Lunchtime, Moscow Mike, the Tears of Russian Boss, the Honey Badgers, the LSA, it's never left. And it's just really cool to see this all back. You know, it was a decision we're like, oh, that would be so cool. You know, but anyways, make sure to get some if you want to support the channel. Anyways, you're going to be ending the merciless plug right there, because that was a merciless plug, worse than what the Ukrainians are doing to the Russians. And so with that, let's get into the polls.
All right, so we have 3 polls to address, and the first one said, are the HIMARS one of the most effective weapons that Ukraine currently fields? It looks like 91%, a humongous majority, said yes, it is highly influential. 4% said not sure, and 4% said no, it's important but not vital. So I think the HIMARS is one of the defining weapons of the war, and I think it is definitely a very vital weapon. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that the HIMARS is one of the most important weapons in the war. And while everyone's talking about aircraft and all kinds of stuff like that, which is really, it's really just the next phase of support, and that's why it's become very mainstream to talk about. One thing that I think is incredibly important is to continue to bolster Ukraine's ground forces, like, for example, the artillery and the air defense forces, because those are really the determining factor of this war. We've seen on the casualty report that most Russian aircraft have been shot down by Ukrainian air defenses, not the Ukrainian Air Force. We've also seen that most of Russian casualties on the ground, for example, in the army, are inflicted by Ukrainian artillery and not Ukrainian infantry forces. And so, all in all, when you really look at the situation, what are the most important criteria for Ukraine are the ground air defense forces and also the ground artillery forces. And if they're able to, I guess you could say, get the best and most advanced equipments in those 2 criteria, they really eliminate all of the remaining threats that the Russians pose. The HIMARS is definitely a major contributing factor to the ground artillery forces. The HIMARS is able to strike 50 miles behind the lines with pinpoint precision onto an exact point, and Ukraine has been provided with the 2 primary munitions that the United States uses. The unitary head, which is just one massive explosive, and also the ball-bearing head, which just launches off pretty much a large buckshot in every single direction. And so, in those regards, the HIMARS is definitely a war-winning piece of kit, and considering that they were equipped, I believe it was with the M30, M31 missile and not the M40, they are able to plaster frontline units with it now, infantry inside of their trenches, infantry advancing in the open, because those ball bearings, like I said, it's literally just a massive piece of buckshot, and so you're going to be pulverizing anything that is within range of the blast radius. And so it is definitely one of the most important and game-changing pieces of equipment that the Ukrainians have. The M777 comes in second place, a very close second. So with that, I hope I addressed that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
Right. And the next one said, is it normal for a helicopter to shake as was seen in the video? It looks like 44% said yes, that is typical, 41% said not sure, and 16% said no, that shake is not normal. Now, I'll be totally honest, if I hadn't seen what people were saying in the live chat, I'd probably be saying not sure, but I see a lot of folks that have flown helicopters saying that that was not a normal shake. All helicopters shake to some extent, but not quite that bad. Apparently the Mi-8 or whatever it's called shakes a little bit more than usual because of the build quality. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I would believe it to be normal for a helicopter shake, but once again, I was also looking in the live chat, and everyone who flew a helicopter, everyone who was someone that in the helicopter world that flew a helicopter was like, no, not really, that's not that normal. And I would largely have to agree, because it looks like that guy, if he got shook anymore, James Bond would have been asking if he was a drink at the bar or something, you know, because he's into shaken not stirred.
Oh man!
But it didn't look that normal, and there's a couple of reasons I'm sure that our helicopter pilots and experts in the live chat could probably come over this a lot more. But there's probably a couple of reasons. One, the Mi-24s, considering that most of them were Soviet-made, may have been made of a poor quality, which would be pretty normal for anything made in the Soviet Union. It could also be that that helicopter is not getting the proper amount of maintenance, or it's lacking, I guess you say the ground crews are lacking the parts to, I guess you could say, replace some of the worn-out pieces inside of the Mi-24, and so that may be the reason why it's shaking. Or it could be something that is near catastrophic as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong if you're a helicopter pilot, and I'm sure that I'm about to get flamed in the live chat if I am wrong, but it could also be, and I forgot the name of it. What is the name? Do you know the name of it, Matthew? It's the, I'll show it to you real quick on a Huey, because it's really easy to see on a Huey. Not a rapper, the Huey helicopter. Why in the world is Google...
There's a rapper called Huey?
There's apparently a rapper called Huey. But what is the name of the bar? It's the apparatus on a helicopter's rotor blade that helps to...
A torsion bar?
Is it the torsion bar?
I just took a stab at that. It's probably wrong.
No, it's not a torsion bar. That's a suspension.
It's a suspension. It's a leaf spring component. Not really. Don't flame me for that either.
I believe it's the balance shaft. Let's put that in.
Balance. Oh, yep. I saw Hokey Redneck say balance shaft.
Yeah. Thank you so. Wait a minute. Balance shaft. That is for piston and stagnabbit. Let's see.
We're hitting all the major components in the engine and suspension at this point.
Yeah, we're just going to start hitting everything. But whatever this is, I'm circling it right here. It's the part of the helicopters, I guess you could say, rotor blades that helps them to adjust in flight, so that way the helicopter can change. I guess you could say its altitude. I guess you could say its climb rate. Let's see. I see a lot of people saying stabilized bar, universal shaft, pitch angle rod. I think that's what it is. It may be those, like they may be not really maintained well, or they may be, of course, of poor quality, and so it's leading the helicopter to shake a good bit. And I'm also seeing a lot of people in the live chat saying that it may be a bad tail rotor. I'm not exactly sure. Honestly, there's probably a million things that could be wrong with a helicopter for it to be shaking like that, but still. It was kind of wild to see, but still, it really added to the whole thing of it looking like this guy was in a cherry picker bucket, and I'll show you all that. Cherry picker bucket.
Saying the collective.
I think it is the collective. I'm not really versed well in helicopter terminology, but I think it is the collective, because you use the collective in the cockpit to adjust, I guess you could say, the climb rate, positive or negative, but anyways, it still looked like these guys were sitting in one of these things right here, a cherry picker, and that thing just flying around in the air, being shook around and stuff, but still pretty... Go ahead, Matthew.
Huh?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. I heard you laugh and then exhale really loudly, and I was like...
I said, yeah.
Well, anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well, and let's get on to the next one.
All right, so for the third and final poll, do you think a full mobilization may be coming in the next 40 days, like the enforcer was talking about a moment ago? It looks like 54%, which is the majority, say that yes, it is coming. 15% said not sure, and 30% said no. Only another partial mobilization is likely. Now, based on what the enforcer was saying, if I had to take a guess, I would not be shocked if a full mobilization was on the way, because it sounds like the losses are massive and they're having a really hard time replenishing basically their troop supply, which is kind of sick to say, but that's what's happening. So I would go with the 54%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to definitely go with the 54%. I feel that it's a pretty good assumption to make based off of the numbers and the figures and number crunching that the amount of losses that the Russians are taking are so high that the partial mobilization has only had an allaying effect to their army just losing, literally bleeding off massive amounts of soldiers per day. And so they're going to have to be calling up some kind of mobilization again. Honestly, though, I'm actually going to have to switch sides here. I'm going to have to go with the 30% that a partial mobilization is coming, because the prior partial mobilization called up reservists. And there is still a load of reservists that they can still call up in another partial mobilization. And so we may see that happen again. And we've also seen something really interesting that I have not covered, which is that Putin talked to some mothers. Putin talks to mothers. And this is very odd, because we rarely ever see him talking to really anyone. And I'll show y'all this here on Euronews, of course.
Cringy, to be honest. Like the reactions on the mothers' faces didn't really match what it should have been, or at least what Putin was going for.
Yeah, it didn't. Hopefully I don't get asked to pay for a sponsorship or something or anything here. And what's really interesting about this is that it looks like they were fed Krabby Patties and some caviar to sit around this table.
The hell is that?
I don't even know. But he sat there and he told them, I sympathize with y'all's pain, and it's always hard to have a son fighting in a war or to lose one, and I feel as much pain as y'all, believe me. And what's kind of weird about that is that this is the first time we've ever seen this happen in the war, where you talk to mothers of these soldiers, of their kids that have gone and fought over there, died, and probably been wounded. And it's also something that I think, considering that we're looking at the casualty rate, maybe showing that he's trying to garner the sympathy of the public, where they're like, and of course everyone's saying they're fake mothers. They probably are. But he's trying to...
It seems like everybody's in consensus about that, and that would make a lot of sense because they didn't really seem like the way you'd expect a grieving mother to act. They seemed like a little disconnected. So I can buy that argument that they're fake.
And everyone's saying it's propaganda, but hear me out, everyone, okay? It is propaganda, of course. Why in the world would he do this for the first time ever in 9 months for no reason? It's a propaganda stunt. But hear me out. Everyone's saying fake news, but you gotta hear me out here, okay? Because this is about to be tying everything together. Why would he do this if it was not for trying to gain the sympathy and the support of the Russian public? What he's trying to do with this little camera stunt here is when he calls up another partial mobilization in a month and a half or 2 months, he's going to be going, oh, yeah, y'all all know, I suffer with all of y'all. I've talked to y'all. I've walked amongst you. But we have to keep this war going. It's as tough for me as it is for y'all. And we need to call up more soldiers to go into this war. We can't let the devils in the West win. That is what this entire thing is probably being set up to do. And we're probably going to see that he's going to be going on an aggressive, I guess you could say, sympathy campaign over the next month and a half to 2 months leading up to the next partial mobilization, because with the losses they're taking, it's got to be inevitable. It may not happen in a month and a half. It may not happen in 2 months. It may be 3 months. They may try and stretch it as long as they can, but this seems to be a sympathy campaign. And it seems to me that it would make the most logical sense that its aim is to pacify the Russian public, or at least make them feel sympathetic to Putin, so that way when he calls up another partial mobilization, the unrest will be incredibly low, and maybe they can even try and drum up a little bit more patriotic fervor in everyone, considering that it looks like it's a hardship on everyone, including him.
Enforcer, I'm seeing a lot of folks saying that these are actually state employees, and it's been verified. Is that true?
It is. Believe it or not, I'll show you another thing that's really funny about state employees. Russian rally Putin. And let me put that in. All right, so this one here was probably the funniest one I ever heard. You remember this one near the beginning of the war? Where Putin went out on that stage in that stadium, and there were snipers up in the gangways and stuff. So what's interesting about this is that all of these people are government employees.
All the people in the entire
Everyone.
arena?
This is very interesting with Russia, is that they'll call this like Russian state employees don't really get a choice in what they do on a certain day. And so they tell them, we're closing down the office for today. Everyone who comes to work is getting on a bus, and y'all are going to be going out here to the stadium. They walk in, they pass them out Russian flags, because look how many Russian flags there are here. Do you really think that everyone has a Russian flag like this big? This was handed out to them. And so they all get into this stadium, they flock in, and they're really just here because they've been told to be here, and that's why there's always been this massive disconnect with how they look, because the crowds are always looking disinterested, like they don't really care and they're hardly into it. And that is because they're all state employees that are pretty much required to be there because it's their job, and if they don't show up, they get fired.
Now, I can kind of believe it at this event in the arena, but the Russian mothers, there's so few of them. There's enough time to research each person to verify if they're actually real or not. And apparently, there's been plenty of evidence going around that they're not real. So that's wild. So do we actually have a side-by-side picture of them showing them as state employees?
Let's see. Putin meets mom's state employees. Let's see. The Guardian says it was staged. and it was. So let's see if they got any proof here. Ah, I gotta respect it. I gotta respect the ads. You know, that's how they make their income. But still, I don't know if the Guardian's trustworthy or not. Let's see. It's clear. Let's see here. We're trying to look through it. I haven't really found any hardcore proof or pictures of a side-by-side of these people being Russian government employees. But can you really doubt it, considering that that's been the common move for them to make a propaganda stunt so far?
I mean, I can believe it. It's just shocking to actually see it because it's going to be obviously disproven, which it was.
Dang it, I want to find them, but I can't freaking find them. I can't find the hardcore proof right now, but still, considering that, like at that previous event in the stadium, they were able to pack a stadium with tens of thousands of people that were all state employees and hand them out flags and try and make it a convincing show, that gathering up like 20 women and making them act as mothers wouldn't be that hard for them. This is still bizarre to think that a country works like this, and that they've pretty much got everyone wrapped around their finger in Russia with the kind of lies that they spin. But anyways, with that, I think we're back now. Let's see. Let me check OBS. We should be back now. We should be okay. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little interesting tidbit about it being staged, and also how that's probably playing into the next partial mobilization. And with that, we are on to the next poll, because you actually run even a fourth one, and it looks like it's gotten a pretty decent amount of votes.
We're actually going to save that one because it hasn't run that long yet. But real quick, I saw Ted say, Enforcer Matt, how did you know the lag was coming? And that's because I'm 15 seconds ahead of you. So I'm in the future a little bit. So y'all are seeing the stream 15 seconds after it's actually aired. So I can send y'all a lag warning. Isn't that just cute? But anyways, moving on to our super chats, because we're going to address that poll in the next segment. Up first, we have a very generous $80 super chat from Mark, Slava, Ukraine. And sadly, he had to get off early tonight to tend to some business. But Mark, if you're watching tomorrow, thank you very much for that support. He says, hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving.
Hey, thank you so much for the support, Mark. And also, we did have a great Thanksgiving. And like, if y'all want to know what we eat, well, what we ate, and we're still eating it, you know, because the Thanksgiving leftovers are a reality. We had turkey, mashed potatoes. You know, you gotta have mashed potatoes with gravy. Gravy really makes a potato. We also had, I'm trying to think of what else. We had stuffing, dressing, which, oh man, like you only get this dressing one time a year. It's on Thanksgiving. It was killer good. We had Sherry's Jubilee, some kind of congealed salad. It's like green. It's really good. I don't know how to explain what it's made of, but it's really good tasting.
It's like Jello powder mixed with marshmallows and also I think pecans or walnuts or something.
I think so. It's just really good. And we also had sweet potato casserole.
Yes.
So, we both went at the same time. It was top-notch stuff, and it was a great Thanksgiving. And so thank you so much, Mark, for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, so that way we can keep this going on until Christmas, and even after Christmas, long after Christmas. And so with that, thank you so much once again, Mark. And it's good to have everyone back, and I'm glad to be back running the stream. Because while we did get a break, and it was nice to sit around and pretty much just charge up for the next probably couple of months of continuous streaming, it was still kind of bizarre to just sit down and have nothing to do in the afternoons. But with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support, Mark.
All right, and moving on to our second one, we have a $100 donation from Hal Rose, who's also a channel legend just like Mark, who says, and thanks for the mug.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, Hal. And thank you for getting a mug and also supporting this channel. It helps us out a great deal, both if you get merchandise and if you support us through a super chat, because those are the only ways that we survive on YouTube. We don't run ads on anything. And also, if y'all go back and y'all see an ad on a stream, either, and I always have to say this because some people always go, you know, like, hey man, like I went back to a stream and there's ads, bro, you're lying. I'm not. Because if there is a ad on our stream, either one, we did not have that one turned on and YouTube's running it without our consent and making all of the money, or two, it's because, and oh yeah, okay, I was trying to get that whole spiel in. it's because the video was copyrighted for one reason or another, and then the copyright holder's running ads on it. And so y'all help us a whole load to keep this channel running. In fact, y'all are the only way we keep this channel running. So I got to thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support, Hal, and also getting a mug. And thank you for getting a mug and helping to keep this channel running. And so with that, we are on to the last one of this segment, and then we're going to be moving to the Northeastern area on the front line.
All right, and for the third and final one of the first segment, we have another generous $100 donation from channel legend BC Skyman, who says, "Did you hear that Putin is planning on nuking Birmingham, Alabama? That's just a bad joke. Slava Ukraine and keep it up, guys."
Well, I thank you for the support, BC Skyman. I would hope that he wouldn't nuke Birmingham, Alabama, because Birmingham, it's not that bad.
It's not that important.
It's not that
important.
It's not that important. It's not that bad. I mean, look at this place. I mean, the only thing important we have here is the Shuttlesworth International Airport. And I think if I look around this airport, here we go, is the KC-135 Stratotankers that we have here. And I think...
Oh, they're going to take us down if they get those.
Oh, they're going to kill us all. Also, there's this Museum of Flight over here, which is kind of neat. But I highly recommend if you come here with security or at least with a police escort, because it's pretty dangerous over there. I almost got robbed. But anyways, moving on from that, these KC-135s are incredibly cool. And a little bit of aviation history and a small rabbit hole here real quick. These are actually... One second, let me make sure to show the side-by-side so that way y'all can see this. Because it's really cool. Okay, so let me come over here. Let me show y'all a picture of one. Boom, right there. You see that fuselage, Matthew? You see how unique of an aircraft this is?
Yes.
Would you
Quite
believe,
unique.
Would you believe it or not? But that is actually the first jet airliner that the United States ever produced, which was a Boeing 707.
You said it's the first?
Pretty much the first major commercial airliner that the United States ever produced. You see it right here, the Boeing 707.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
now I don't know history that well, but I could have sworn it was a different one because I don't remember it being 4 engines on the first one.
I believe the first jet airliner in the world was the British de Havilland Comet. But I may be wrong. Let's check real quick. It was the de Havilland Comet, but I believe the first American jet airliner, would have been the 707. It is the Boeing 707-120.
Interesting.
So,
and it was Pan Am that got it. How nice.
Yeah, Pan Am was the first one to get it. Pan Am was really the industry-setting standard back in the day. Also, that's a really cool livery. I like it. But they were the industry setter back in the day. They were always the one getting the first thing, the newest thing. And what is super cool, what is really cool about that, is that they would also be the first one to get the 747 in the world. The first airline ever. And you can see one right there in Pan Am livery.
That is so cool. They ought to bring back Pan Am like in a spin-off company. That'd be pretty cool.
I think they ought to just revitalize the brand. Someone actually bought the branding rights, a railroad company did, and they now run Pan Am Railways. And it's just the weirdest thing because it has the exact same livery and everything, and I'll show you that. Let me see. Here we go, right here. Pan Am Railways.
Oh, wow. And wait, is that still around, or is that just like from back in the day?
It was some kind of train company. They're like a small conglomerate train company that runs some branch lines, and they bought the logo rights from Pan Am when they went bankrupt in 1991, and so they had Pan Am livery trains. They still have them to this day. There's one right there, Pan Am Railways.
That's pretty cool.
It
looks better than CSX, to be totally honest.
Honestly, it looks better than CSX. Not gonna lie, anything looks better than CSX, but it's just so weird, and it's also really cool. Also, they run a vintage F8, I think. It's just weird. Also, it looks like CSX bought them out. So I think that's why.
Did it change the livery?
No, I don't think they did.
Oh, they can't do that. That'd be criminal.
Yeah, but we're about to go down a rabbit hole with railroad liveries. Because honestly, I don't know about you, Matthew, but I think that Norfolk. Let me pull them up. Norfolk Southern has the best liveries in the United States for a freight company.
Yeah, somewhat. I was about to say Union Pacific.
I knew you were going to say Union Pacific. I was waiting for it. I was like, he's going to say Union Pacific, isn't he? Union Pacific.
I'm not biased. I'm not biased because I have a model of a Union Pacific train or anything.
Union Pacific has a really neat livery. They also, like, we're really going down a rabbit hole here, and I'm sorry about that, everyone. But what's neat about this yellow is that engineers in Union Pacific actually told their corporate office, like in a vote, that yellow would be the best thing to paint their diesel trains in back in the 1930s because you could see them from miles away, and so it made it a lot safer on level crossings, because when someone looked down the railroad tracks to see if there was a train coming, they can actually see it because it was yellow. I don't really think that stands up to be true in some places like the Midwest because it almost blends in with like the yellowish grass, but you know, in other places like here in the South, these things stick out a whole load with that yellow color. Anyways, we need to get off the railroad talk because that's a massive rabbit hole that we're not here for, but still, it's really cool to see that those seven, and it's weird that we start off with the KC-135 and we were talking about that. But anyways, I don't think they nuked Birmingham. If they did, they would probably nuke this specific spot on the tarmac to wipe out the Stratotankers. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, PC Skyman, and getting us down probably one of the weirdest rabbit holes we've done in a while. But thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I believe that was the last one of this segment, Matthew.
It was.
And so with that, it's now time for us to move into the northeastern area of the front line, and we've gotten very little news from this area. Starting off in the area, once again, of Nizhnya Duzhanka, we saw that a Ukrainian SPG-9 was firing into the distance with, I believe... No, that's actually a different video with the help of a drone. I think that's a separate one. But we can see here the Ukrainians driving down the road. Snow everywhere. And some kind of music playing, so we have to mute it.
That guy's like garbled voice over that actually kind of fit.
Yeah, it sounded like the lyrics.
Iloba.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it actually didn't sound that bad. We see that the snow's gotten a little sparse in this area. It may have actually melted off a little bit. We now see them with the SPG-9 in the snow, preparing to fire. And firing. We now see it firing again. Now see them loading the next round. Boom. Firing again. I gotta say, it's really bizarre to see. The SPG-9 is by far a very old and antiquated system, but both sides use the SPG-9 to very heavy degrees. I mean, they're used everywhere, all over the front lines. One, because there's thousands of them, and two, because they're cheap. Also, this almost gave me a small heart attack because this guy is standing right in the back blast of the SPG-9, and I thought they were about to fire it. I thought we were about to see this guy get turned into a pulverized, like, hot dog, but it looks like they're sighting it right now. I saw that, Matthew, and my eyes just went wide. I was like, oh crap, did I not notice an NSFW like tag or something on this?
I still wouldn't stand behind it.
Honestly, I wouldn't feel safe behind it either. We can see, it looks like there's a spotter in a house. Nice pink wallpaper. Also, they're trying to look through the scope, and we can see the impact of the SPG-9 way downrange. You can see them loading the SPG-9 again. Firing again. And you're right, okay, cool. It does look like a bazooka on a tripod. We now see them firing again. They fired off quite a salvo here. It's about 7 shots at this point, I believe. And with that, that's the end of the video, but a really interesting look, a really cool one, at this SPG-9 in operation in the northeastern area, and hopefully it's hitting its targets quite effectively. The SPG-9, I believe, let me check this, SPG-9 caliber, it's a 73 millimeter. The BMP-1 main gun is also 73 millimeters, I believe. It's a 73 millimeter. So the SPG-9, an SPG-9, has about the same firepower as a BMP-1. Both of them use recoilless rifles. I believe the BMP-1 is a different design of recoilless gun. It also is, I guess you could say, more conventional in its design. But the SPG-9 is a really interesting piece of kit. And it pretty much brings the firepower of an armored personnel carrier to the front line, to these infantry, without having to drive an expensive, well, much more expensive compared to an SPG-9, BMP-1 to the front lines to deliver that firepower. So really neat. So with that, we're now going to be moving on a little bit further south of Svatove, into the area of, I guess you could say, Novomakielsk, where we saw Radio Free Europe show us the war-changing gun, the M777. I guess you could really say the first of the war-changing pieces of support that the West sent in mass. This gun, designed by the British, was sent by practically every single country that used it. The Estonians, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, everyone sent these. So let's take a look at what the Ukrainians think of this M777 months down the road after it's become a commonplace piece in the Ukrainian armed forces. Also, I like how YouTube's now putting a disclaimer that it's funded by the American government. Thank you. I thank you for that. It is true.
That's kind of them. It's like, what harm could it do if people watched it and didn't know that?
Well, you know, I guess that's kind of like that blanket statement, because at the same time, it really these markers do help out, for example, with Chinese-funded media or Russian-funded media, because it just gets marked, you know, it's like, this is funded by the Russian government, this is funded by the Chinese government, because, you know, unlike the United States, these are largely neutral reporting pieces, they don't even really pick a side in these. Other countries are not so kind with their news delivery. Sometimes they make sure to emphasize their message over the actual news. Oh, and you can just hear their feet sloshing around the mud. This guy is like wearing like... Is he wearing like jack boots? Yeah, he's wearing like farm boots or jack boots or something. They're improvising. They're adapting. They're overcoming. Bear Grylls would be proud of that right there. That emphasizes the 3 tenets of Bear Grylls' survival, where he ate Big Macs off screen. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. And man, does that thing sound good.
Гармата М777 калібру 155 мм. В народі 3 топора, 3 сокири. Так от ця гармата, як і кажуть військові Збройні Сили України, зрештою це підтверджують і західні партнери, переламала хід війни. І ось чому.
See them getting the shells ready.
Нема такого, щоб уражити нашу ціль, нашу гармату уражити невозможно, мабуть. Просто вона б'є точно, дуже точно і дуже хорошо наводяться люди, працюють люди, які працюють на цій гарматі, вони дуже добре працюють. І це дуже добре. І за того у нас є колективність, зглаженість. Ми працюємо добре, все як положено.
Стаб Б, як би я можу сказати, це набагато мощніша. Це однозначно. Точніша, це ми вже знаємо, вже на роботі її, це ми точно знаємо. Маскувати її, вона проще, коли неї робота, одразу важко було, тому що робили на радянських. Зараз ми, які вже добре знаємо, то в нас виходить на неї доволі непогано, можемо точно сказати. Стаб Б, я не можу її навіть в порівняння поставити. Цілі дуже багато, вони кожна смачна по-своєму. Але були такі там особовий склад більше всього. Приносить більше, було там, по-моєму, 300 чоловік.
Dang! What the hell? They hit 300 people? One time we have hit 300 people. 300 people by this cannon? Yes, infantry. Holy moly! No wonder the Russians are losing 540 killed a day. They hit 300 people in pretty much just one large barrage? That's
pretty damn accurate.
Man, good lord. I mean, imagine being the drone operator watching that barrage come in on those Russians. That must have been... Man, that must have been horrific to just even watch from a distance on a drone. They literally slaughtered half of BTG, just straight up got them. Like, killed them off.
Це було піхоти, так. Ми крили очередю, чергою, по-моєму, навіть не вспомню.
He's like, yeah, obliterating 300 Russians in a single barrage kept the spirits high, kept the morale going.
Це дійсно дало радості і бойового духу додавало на дуже довге время. Чому вона переламала хід війни, як з мого досвіду можу сказати, що це точність, прицільність. Прицільність попадання, Як ви бачили самі вже, то це, ну, якщо налагоджена робота і це швидкість. І ми стріляємо, ми просто так не працюємо. Ми працюємо чітко, працюємо по цілі, лишнього не стріляємо. Якщо ми виходимо на роботу з сімерки, то вона робить недовго, але ефективно.
Не бери ніколи в руки зброю.
Now see them loading the piece again. Oh, that's the end of the video. But a wild look, a very interesting look at this war-changing gun, the M777. Probably, by far, one of the most important battlefield additions that the Ukrainians have gotten, next to the HIMARS, that has completely changed the course of the war. Artillery can never be overstated in its effectiveness. While an infantryman may be able to get a SCAR heavy, or a SCAR of any kind, or an M4, which may be slightly better, or way better, than an AK-74, one thing can never be overstated, that artillery is truly the game-changing, war-winning factor in modern warfare. An infantry unit can come in contact, a Ukrainian infantry unit can get in a firefight with a Russian unit, and the artillery behind the lines, with the laser-guided precision it has, along with the well-trained Ukrainian artillerists, are able to pinpoint hit these Russian forces and knock them out without the infantry unit hardly having to fight them at all. And that is a massive changing factor and a massive limitation that the Russians now have to work with, is that they're completely outgunned in terms of the precision and accuracy that Ukrainian artillerists have over their own. And while the Russians may have numbers, accuracy is what counts. You can throw down 100 rounds on a single Ukrainian platoon, but if only one of those rounds hit their mark, you're just wasting a whole load of ammunition, time, and effort to achieve very little, while the Ukrainians are able to land 2 or 3 shots and knock out an entire platoon, maybe even an entire company or half of a BTG. And so with that, once again, a crazy look at what's going on in the northeast area near Svatove. And while we've been talking about that, once again, we can see that down in the Kreminna area, which we have no video reports to speak of, we have heard of some kind of a Russian probing attack using about 3 or 4 BTGs that is trying to push towards the area of Torske, which is pretty much north of Lyman, and where we saw the Russians fighting months ago to capture the primary road that of course led towards Lyman, and then further down towards, I believe, if I'm correct, Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, which I'll take, yeah, I'm correct. So it's pretty interesting to see that they're doing that again. Also considering that the Russians really don't have a fighting chance at this point at conducting a successful offensive, considering that the supply lines are so heavily overstrained, and also that Russian forces are so poorly equipped and poorly trained themselves. It seems as though it's a pointless assault, and it probably is. We're not even getting any video or picture evidence of what's going on down there right now, but we have seen that the front line has not changed whatsoever, according to Deep State UA. Moving a little bit further down the front lines and on into the area near Verkno-Kamianka, we saw a very rare destruction of a tank right outside the Lysychansk oil refinery. And so without further ado, here's that video as well. Pretty interesting one. We can also hear them playing the good music as the tank goes up in a good way. We can see some pieces flying up in the air, but no turret.
They're gonna catch the few trees that are left on fire.
Smokey the Bear said, "Only you can prevent forest fires," and the Ukrainians took that as a personal offense, and they've now decided to set on another grand wildfire. Still with pretty good calls, though, and it's nice to see that that artillery shell hit that tank. Apparently, I'm assuming, it's really hard to tell where it hit. It kind of looks like it may have hit on the engine bay, because it looks like diesel just flew out of the tank in every direction, just started burning in the fields and on the roads and in the tree line. But man, that was a hit. That was a hit and a half right there, and that tank is definitely out for the count. Well, that's pretty interesting to see, but going to the Deep State UA map, there's not really a lot going on in this area. As far as we can tell, the front lines are largely remaining stagnant, and that was one of the rare times that the Ukrainians got off a really good pot shot on a Russian vehicle and caused it to go up in flames in the area. Beyond that, this area has been has been very static, and we're probably not going to be seeing any changes here for some while. Moving on to the Bilo-Orivka area, or the Yakovlivka area north of Soledar, we did see that the Ukrainians dropped some more nades on the Russians. And while we're waiting for this video to load, how are y'all doing tonight? Y'all doing good? Alright, there we go. So let's check out the Ukrainians dropping some vlogs on the Russians. We hear some Eurobeat techno music playing. We can also see that a Russian tank has already gone up in flames. It looks like it was a T-64BV, and we can now see some Russian soldiers hunkered over on the side of a wall, and it appears that
They're all in one spot, like always.
yeah, they're all grouping up in one spot as usual. Very smart. And we now see the Ukrainians dropping the small grenades. We see we can see a couple of Russian soldiers having taken naps. It seems that many of them are sleeping. We see some of them still in their hole. We see some of them being hit near their hole. We see some of them running for the holes. Oh, okay. We're going.
That bomblet activated on the guy.
Well, actually, he decided to do a vanishing trick. But we can see the bomblets dropping in other areas, and it looks like they're quite effective. So that's the least we can say. They're very effective. You see this one hitting very close to the infantry again. See the soldier on the run.
Oh, don't want to trip at that point.
Oh.
Oh, he just ran in the hole where they were just trying to hit?
Yes, and then I'm sure we didn't get to see this, but the drone probably adjusted, and then, it went very PG-13. So, yeah. I'm trying to figure out what to say here, but there's very little I can say. That one hit dead on. Oh my lord. Like, for some reason, while we were gone, Ukrainian drone pilots have now gotten into the HIMARS level of precision with these bomblets. Like, I've never seen anything like this in a clip. All of these videos are pretty much just them hitting the Russians dead on. Sometimes literally dead on. And with that, that's the end. There's a couple of more sleeping Russians, and with that, that's the end of the video, and good lord. I can't really add a lot to that, but you can tell that the drone units in that area are definitely doing a good deal of work on the Russian forces and causing a good deal of damage. Moving on down to the Yakovlivka area, we also saw that the Russians are once again using incendiaries to a level that's unbelievable. And we can see here the incendiaries burning on the ground in the distance.
Це, ребята, нахуй, блядь, цей фосфор. Вот так летают ночью, суки, пидорасы.
Well, that's the end of the video, but once again, the Russians are trying to use incendiary munitions to burn soldiers alive on the front lines, which it's always hard to talk about incendiaries because it almost seems like there is just a written-in gray area in the rules of war as to how these things can be used. Of course, use against civilians is a war crime. Everything's a war crime. So I feel like it's almost moot to say that it's a war crime to use incendiaries against civilians, because it's a war crime to also shoot them. It's also a war crime to do anything to civilians with a weapon of war. So that's kind of moot. But it is kind of in a gray area as to how you can use it against soldiers, because in some instances, it has almost seemed like it is okay to use incendiaries and burn soldiers alive. In others, it seems like the rules are leaning more in the direction of it's not. So I'm not really sure, but still the premise of, well, the idea of getting burned alive by an incendiary munition isn't really the best thing. And it also shows that the Russians are once again pulling out some of the dirty tactics to try and kill Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines. With that, we're now going to be moving down to the area of Bakhmut and Soledar, where we saw that some Ukrainians had to endure some incoming artillery. And also, y'all are about to start seeing that the snow, apparently it's not cold enough to keep the snow as snow, and it's beginning to melt, and we're about to see that the area of Bakhmut has turned into the muddy fields of Flanders. You see that right here as these soldiers are literally bathing in mud in this trench.
That is nasty.
That is terrible. We can hear the boom of the artillery in the distance. We now hear the rounds coming in nearby. Oh man, that would be horrendous. The mud is terrible. I can't stand that. Anyways, we're now going to be moving on from that, and if you didn't like the mud there, you're really not going to like the mud here. On day 275, we got a couple of pictures from the Ukrainian trenches in this area. Actually, I'm sorry, correction. This is another video from the Ukrainian trenches in this area, and I'm also going to let y'all take a look at this before we get to the pictures.
Добрый день. Вот посмотрите, в каких условиях ребята живут. Отдыхают после поста.
Номер пятизвездочный.
Да.
This is hell.
И стою в таланах. Вот так мы и воюем.
Now,
Is there nowhere else they could go to like set up their like camp?
no, there's not. You have to dig a trench, because that's one of the few ways that you can be protected from direct fire. So they have to dig a trench, and then if it snows and it gets warm enough, the snow melts, and then it creates slushes, and then the slushes, of course, pool into the lower areas, which is the trench, and so you just live in this mud-infested pit. Like this is literally, if I pull up Flanders, World War I pictures, and I show you all this, it looks just like this. It's just so bizarre to see that in real life today, you can see the exact same conditions that soldiers lived in during the First World War 100 years in the future or more. There, right there, you can see that in World War I, you know, because the front lines were so static, they would usually build these boardwalks and planks in between the front line trenches and reserve trenches, so that way you didn't have to sit there and just trudge through mud. But you can also see here that they're evacuating wounded from, I'm supposing, an area of no man's land that they were actually able to take, so they were actually able to get stretcher bearers in and start evacuating the wounded or the dead that hadn't been taken out yet. And you can see that it looks just like it, just churned up ground, covered in mud, covered in just muddy puddles. Here's even a better picture. This one probably is exactly like that. I mean, hell, it is exactly like that. Like, if we go back to this right here,
И
no
стою
difference.
в таланах.
I'm not even really sure how you even prevent getting diseases or like trench foot
Well,
in that type of conditions.
they're probably, the Ukrainians and the Russians are probably going to have to start rotating their units out very often, probably within just a few days each. So that way the soldiers, I guess you could say, could get out of the exposure of this kind of of these kinds of terrible conditions, to make sure that they don't get any kind of diseases or any kind of rot or anything similar, because World War I soldiers even got rotated out a whole lot, and that was usually due to these kinds of conditions, especially in the areas of Flanders, or as it would be later on known as Passchendaele or Ypres. But still, it's horrendous. I mean, I'm really at a lack of words to explain how horrendous it is. And if you read accounts of First World War soldiers, a lot of them lived in these conditions, especially in the Belgian areas of the front lines, almost all the time. It was terrible. Like it was so bad that most soldiers were taken out of action in that area just by the conditions in the environment they were living in, and not even the enemy. You know, diseases were rampant. You could get all kinds of different sorts of rot depending on what areas of your body were exposed the most to the mud and the water. It's just terrible. And I see a lot of people listing off the diseases. We got like a disease speed run down there in the live chat. Everyone's like cholera, dysentery. You're going to get it all. And hopefully they're able to rotate these soldiers out, or at least get them some kind of antibiotics or medications often enough that they don't get any kind of afflictions or diseases from being in these trenches for too long. But this is the situation that's being faced in the entire Bakhmut area. And we move down to day 276's news. And I think this is actually the pictures. We missed the pictures. Let me go back. It was actually day 275. We can see some pictures of more trenches in Bakhmut. what it looks like over them.
Oh man, they took that one down.
They took it down, and those are some really good pictures. Luckily enough, I actually saved one on Canva. So really quick, let me pull one up on Canva and show it to you, because I was actually debating whether it should be tonight's thumbnail or not. So let me go over here to the thumbnails, because it's saved in here, luckily enough, and I'll throw it up in here. So let's see here, uploads. There we go. All right, so let me enlarge this real quick so y'all can see it. Improvise, adapt, overcome. This is the picture I was wanting to show y'all earlier. That is a trench in the Bakhmut area, and I wasn't able to get the other picture, but this is the only one I was able to get, and it's terrible even here. I mean, the trees have been destroyed completely above the trenches. There's really nothing above the trench. The other picture just showed that all of the trees in the area had been cut down to about knee height. You know, everything that was a tree is now about the height of a knee. And that was what existed over this trench line, and in the trench line is nothing but mud and misery. I mean,
this might be the worst conditions I've seen them fight in yet, because this is like the worst condition I think they could be fighting in.
It certainly is the worst. Luckily enough, in some areas, I guess you could say that the Ukrainians do have the advantage, especially in the Bakhmut area, which will go down here, because they do control all of the ridges overlooking Bakhmut, except for the southeastern one. And so if the trench works are anywhere on these hillsides, hopefully, you know, them being sloped, maybe the water will pull up down on the trenches at the very bottom of the hill, so at least the trenches further up will be okay. But I mean, if you're in Bakhmut itself and there's a trench down there, you're receiving the water from all of the surrounding hills. It's just going to start pulling up down there. And also, if you're a Russian and you're in between these hills, you're also dealing with the same problem. And so it's going to be horrendous. We're probably going to see that there's going to be a massive amount of casualties, not because of direct fighting, but because of the living conditions in these trenches, both for the Russians and the Ukrainians at this point. Because it's just gotten so bad. We're probably never going to see conditions like this in the war again, at least until next year. And it's going to be really going to be really tough. You could probably try and get into the logistics for the Ukrainians of how they're going to deal with this, but we don't want to get into that much detail for operational security reasons. You know, specifically explaining where exactly they are in the town, where they're going to be moving. But it's horrendous, especially due to the topography of the area, with what kind of climate, environment, and living conditions they're now having to all deal with. So,
is it completely impossible for the Ukrainians simply not to fight from the trenches, or do they have to stay in those trenches? But it seems like the negatives outweigh the positives.
They really have to stay in those trenches. Like in the First World War, the positives of being in those trenches and dealing with things like dysentery and trench foot and other kinds of, and cholera, for instance, among many other things, that is really much more advantageous than sitting in the open, just on flat level ground. Because if you're on flat level ground and someone starts firing at you, there's no cover. Especially in Ukraine, where almost everything's flat, and even in Bakhmut with some hills around it, it's still generally flat. If you're caught in the open there, you're practically dead. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, and it's too late to start digging. And so it's a lot better to be in that trench, because it saves you from artillery for the most part, although artillery's gotten fairly accurate these days. Russian artillery still isn't accurate enough to hit those trenches directly inside of them and have the shrapnel travel down the lengths of it. So it does protect them from artillery, and so for that reason, the benefits do outweigh the positives in that degree.
Interesting.
And so with that, we're now going to be going to our last clip from Bakhmut, where we're going to be watching a Ukrainian soldier recording himself and what's been going on in the area. And so here's the video. Air rounds fly right overhead and explode.
Mina. Пошла дальше, еще холостая.
We now see him getting up again. We hear another round fly over and explode. And even more, they're right over his head. We now hear fire in the distance.
Давайте, пацаны, тримайтесь, блядь. Сука.
Я принял координаты. Поезд 53.
And the firefight has just begun. It sounds like a quarter mile in front of this guy. It's massive. It sounds like both sides have just lit up on each other, and neither of them have gotten pinned down, so they're just slugging each other.
Да, пацаны, замес попали, блядь. Они просто поперли сразу, окопались за этой, за зеленкой. Наши немного аж поменяли. Это наши миномет.
Here's something explode nearby. It didn't have a whistle, so we're not sure if that was an artillery shell or artillery.
Да дай-то по той ебаной посадке, блядь. Сука, не видно нихуя.
See him looking out into the distance with the scope. And what I'm assuming is that the reason why we're not really in a first person in that firefight down the ways, and I have seen some people say this in the live chat, so I feel like this would be good to bring up, is that this guy is probably a marksman. Not a sniper, because a sniper would have a spotter and they're usually completely removed from actual battles. They're usually just harassing the enemy in quieter areas. I believe this man may be the unit's marksman. And so that's why he's not directly in the fight, but he's still somewhat close to it. And that's also why we can see he's got a pretty nice rifle here with a fairly expensive looking scope. I can only say it's expensive looking. I don't know the exact specs on it. But we can see him looking to the distance from where we're hearing the firefight.
Мина!
We hear someone talking to him nearby, which may be his spotter or a fellow squad member. We now hear what appears to be an autocannon. It may be a BMP-2.
Есть!
We hear him say that he hit someone, or something hit. I'm not really sure what.
Тщетно.
I'm impressed he can film himself during all that chaos.
Yeah, like we're just watching a first-person POV of this guy in the middle of a firefight. It's really bizarre. I mean, like, he held up that he was like his own cameraman. He held that thing. He stabilized it the whole time. Like, good work on that. Good work on that guy.
He's jumping down in the trench with the gun while holding the camera, and then mounting it back on the side of the trench. He's like a pretty damn good multitasker.
He might need to have a career in YouTube. This stuff is pretty good. But still, it's wild to see. Well, really not wild to see. Wild to hear the kind of firefight that happened right in front of him. And that was intense. It didn't really sound like either side died down until the last 20 seconds, and both of them pretty much disengaged at the same time rather than the autocannon. So that was wild. We didn't get to see him fire off any shots or get any action. Luckily for him, probably he got a little bit of a break for a short while. But whatever was happening in front of him was just absolutely massive. Really no other way to explain it. And we've seen that the Russians have once again started up their offensives, or at least assaults again towards Bakhmut. But once again, it doesn't have the same luster it had the first time. The first time, we had an idea that around 8 to 9 BTGs were involved in the push. This time, there's only about 3 to 4. So they've cut the attacking force by half. And that means that it probably doesn't have the same scope or goal as the first one did, and it may be to see if Ukrainian forces are weakened or if there's a weak spot in any part of the front lines that a larger force can exploit. We're not entirely sure if the Russians will find a weak point. They didn't find a weak point for about a month and a half of fighting beforehand, and so I don't think that this one will be met with any success as well. And so with that, it's now time for us to move down into the Donetsk area, as well as the southern front and Kherson, where we've actually seen some activity. But before we move on to that, there was an interesting poll that Matthew just took down talking about the muddy conditions in the area of Bakhmut. So before we move on from there, let's address that poll and see what all of y'all are thinking and voting on.
Right. So the question is, do you think that the muddy conditions are the worst conditions to fight in? It looks like 72% said yes, mud is the worst. 7% said not sure, and 21% said no, there are worse conditions. Now, for me, I think the mud has to be the worst because they are literally wading in just a pure slush, and that can cause a boatload of diseases, as we've already mentioned. I can't really think of a worse condition to fight in. I mean, you could be fighting in a desert where it's really hot, but to me, that's better than fighting in mud. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that mud is the worst, and it was the worst to World War One soldiers. It was the worst to soldiers in Vietnam, in Korea, in World War Two. Mud is by far the worst thing to fight in. It doesn't matter the time of year, the season. If there's mud, it's horrendous, and that's one thing that I actually saw that a guy called Sledge. If y'all have ever read his book, I believe it was called. I had to read it for college. I'm trying to remember the name of it. With the Old Breed. It's a very good book. It's probably one of the best firsthand accounts of the war in the Pacific that there is. He was actually a veteran of the Battle of Peleliu, which I'll try and find y'all Peleliu real quick. Let's see here. Here we go, Peleliu, right down here. He was a veteran of the Battle of Peleliu and Okinawa, and he said that Okinawa, with its muddy conditions, was so much worse than the rock-hard coral of Peleliu. And when he was talking about the Battle of Peleliu, he was complaining about how horrendous it was to fight over coral because there's no way for you to dig into. You can't dig into the stuff and hide from artillery or anything. You're just sitting on top of this rock. But when he got to Okinawa, he said it was so much worse because the rain came in, and the ground, which had been churned up by artillery fire and also air support by the U.S. Navy, turned it into this muddy hellhole that you couldn't escape. There was no way to get out of it. And he said that, he thought the coral was bad, but once he experienced the mud in Okinawa, it was just so much worse. And every soldier from World War One, like poison gas being fired at from machine guns, going through horrendous offensives where hundreds are just ground up by machine guns, those things were almost an aside. What took the primary, I guess you could say, point of oration for World War One soldiers was the mud. Like, the mud was the constant enemy of everyone who ever served in an actual battlefield, from what it was written. They hated that stuff more than friends getting killed around them, it seemed, from the way they would talk about it. And also how it would suck up people, because mud, if it gets churned up and thrown around, people can get buried in the stuff a little bit, kind of in a shallow grave. And so you run over what appears to be mud, but it's actually I'm probably getting a little bit too graphic here, but it's a bloated, rotting corpse. And so your foot just, goes straight through their cavity, like stomach cavity, where you thought there was mud. You're actually now standing in a dead person's guts. That's a story that was often recounted in places like, I guess you could say really all over the front in World War One. And one of the weirder ones in Okinawa was how they said that the ground was almost like half mud and half maggots. Which is a very horrendous sight to think about, and that was also very common in World War One during some battles, like the Battle of the Somme. But anyways, we're getting way down that rabbit hole. I think, based off of first-hand accounts from soldiers, from wars really of all parts of history, mud is the worst. It has to be the worst. And so with that, I hope I addressed that poll fairly well. And some people are like, "Dude, I'm eating." And I'm sorry, but I had to. I
should have given a warning.
I should have. But anyways, with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. And now some people are making jokes about the maggots. Oh my god. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next poll said, do you think the HIMARS or M777 is more effective? It looks like 76% said HIMARS, 12% said M777, and 13% said I'm not sure. Now, on this one, I'm going to say HIMARS for obvious reasons, but Enforcer, what say you?
On this one, I'm going to have to say I'm not sure, because the M777 and the HIMARS, in my opinion, are really in two different categories. While the M777 is primarily frontline artillery, the HIMARS is more of a strategic artillery. Whereas the M777 is targeting soldiers and I guess you could say armored vehicles that are fighting the Ukrainian army directly, the M777's job is to fire at supply lines and communication hubs well behind the lines and behind the fighting forces. So in those criteria, if we were comparing like the HIMARS compared to like say an Uragan or a Grad, it is the best in that category. If we're comparing the M777 to like a Mista B or anything similar to that, I would say it's by far the best in that category. But really, if you compared both of them in terms of their damage and their abilities, and considering that now the HIMARS has been given the ability with the tungsten ball-bearing warheads on the M30 to hit frontline forces, I would say that the HIMARS is by far way better. And of course, that's just my opinion. You know, if you're dividing them by category of what they're really used for, they're both really the best in their own categories. But if you compare them up against each other, the HIMARS is by far better. And so with that, I hope that addresses the poll fairly well. What do you think, Matthew?
I'd have to agree with you.
All right. So with that, let's get on to the next one.
So the third and final poll of this segment says, do you believe the Russian quote-unquote mothers were actually actors instead of actual mothers? It looks like 88% said yes, it was 100% fake and staged. 9% said not sure, and 3% said no, it was legitimate. It appears that everybody's in consensus that it was definitely staged, and from what we've researched, it would definitely appear so, and that is kind of baffling to me because the entire rest of the world is going to figure it out like we did. But apparently the Russian people are so cut off from the outside world, the Russian government didn't expect them to figure it out. But for sure, what say you?
I would say it's, of course, staged. Everything that Putin has done so far with the public has been staged. And so I would have no doubt whatsoever that that was staged as well. I haven't been able to find hardcore proof of that on stream, but I mean, like, you know, the writing's on the wall. I mean, he doesn't meet with common people anymore. He hides in a bunker in the Kremlin or somewhere else in the country. And so why in the world would he meet up with common people for the first time now? That would make very little sense for him. And so I would definitely have to agree that those people are staged actors, much like in North Korea. Kim Jong-il funeral. If you don't cry hard enough, you go to the camps, is what these people were told. Let me see if I can find the pictures here. Yeah, here we go. All of this forced crying, all of these, like, forced emotions. Like, you can tell, like, not a single tear is being shed in this picture. You know? But they are all... But they're all having to have this look of anguish because they were all told, if you don't cry hard enough, we're going to put your sorry, you know, rear ends in a camp in northern North Korea. So, I mean, I definitely, like, certainly 100% is really the same thing on a lesser level, though, because Russia, while being evil, they don't really get to the levels of evil that North Korea gets to. North Korea is on a whole different level. Also, by the way...
Look at that photo over there of that car holding the humongous portrait. Do you see that one?
Yes, I do.
How in the hell do you mount that to the top of the car? And isn't it like a massive wind catcher? It's like Kim Jong-il?
Yeah, it was Kim Jong-il.
His face is just like catching bugs and mosquitoes and whatever's over there.
Oh, man. Honestly, it is. And also, what is this? Toilet paper rolls on the side of it?
I don't even know. And what is that car? Like some old, like, 1950, like, Cadillac or something?
It looks like a 1970 Cadillac Eldorado. Hey, let me look at that real quick. Cadillac... Wait a minute, no. It's not a Cadillac Eldorado. I'll pull it up, though, to make sure. Cadillac Eldorado. We want the 1971, please. It almost looks like it, not going to lie. It's very close.
How'd they even get their hands on that?
Oh, man, they got their ways, man. Like, really, like, North Korea is like a rip-off artist. Like, they know how to get people into a small deal and then rip them off. I gotta find out, though.
I see folks saying it's a Lincoln.
Lincoln
like
limousines.
Matt McConaughey said.
Wait a minute.
I'm driving my Lincoln.
1970 Lincoln Continental. It's very close.
That might be it.
I don't. The grill doesn't really match up though. Some people. It's literally says Lincoln, guys.
Where did it say Lincoln?
I didn't. I said it on the little news bulletin thing down here, but it doesn't say what make of Lincoln.
Oh, it literally said Lincoln.
Yeah, it says
my God.
Lincoln. We didn't read it. So let's see. North Korean. I got to learn more about this here real quick. Lincolns. Mystery of the North
Oh, there was
Korean.
a whole, like, scandal around it, apparently.
The DetroitBureau.com got to the bottom of this. Let's see here. Detroit Lincoln stretch limousine leading the parade, coffin on top.
You know what that car reminds me of, like the like in the gangster movies and stuff like that.
You
I
know
don't know if that's what kind of influenced them picking it.
You know what? You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a pimp named Slickback. Like, it reminds me of something like that. Like, this is not the kind of car that you would want to lay someone to rest in. This is like, I don't know. This doesn't really bring the imagery.
And is one of the headlights out?
Is it?
Is
No,
it?
I
Oh no,
think-
it's a reflector. It's a reflection,
Oh,
I
okay,
think.
okay.
It's silver reflector.
Can we just find the model of the car? That's what I'm trying to find. I don't know. Isn't it kind of ironic, though, everyone, that they laid to rest Kim Jong-il, the leader of the revolution after his dad Kim Il-sung, the guy who's going to destroy America, and they carried him around in his funeral on an American-made Lincoln. Like, isn't that kind of ironic?
Yes, they hate the Americans, but we'll take their car.
Man, they hate the Americans, but for some reason, let's bring over basketball players from the United States into North Korea, although we hate America and everything America does. It's always funny to look at North Korea, because really, I'm about to go down a big rabbit hole here, but they call themselves communists, but really what they are is like isolationist Japan or isolationist Korea during the 1800s. Communism is nothing more than a veil and a guise, and it's really just a kingdom or an oligarchy run by one king. You know, they die and the next one succeeds them in the family. It's not like, it's only communist by name. This may as well be some kind of weird hermit kingdom run by some weird hermit king. But anyways, we need to move on from this rabbit hole because we're getting down a really long length of rabbit hole here. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so it is now time to move on to our super chat questions. And up first, we have a $40 donation from channel legend Duncan VR. And Duncan, I'm going to have to abridge it just a little bit because this is probably the longest super chat you've ever sent in, and it's a bunch of animal noises. So Duncan says, "Ba moo ba," the Matthew song. "Ba moo woof, ba moo rough." Sing it. He also says, "Ba ba, shoot off Putin's toes with a stinger." Ba ba, take a question from the chat. Meow, good guys you are. Back,
Man.
Baba.
Duncan, you always get me with the most violent stuff you put in the middle of these noises. You could be like, "Baba, moo moo," rip out their tongues with a tweezer. "Baba, moo moo, I love chicken." You know, it's like, what the hell? It's like the weird, like, it's the funniest thing. Always, for some reason, that always takes me with like a whiplash right there, because I'm always like, what the hell? Like, I don't even know. For some reason, it's like the shock of it is never wore off every time you do that. But I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because your support, of course, it's helped us out a whole load. You've been here forever. You're one of the old guard. And without y'all's support, we wouldn't even be around today. Because, you know, we wouldn't be able to have the time. We would have to go and do something else to survive. But thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Duncan VR. And once again, torturing Matthew with the animal noises and also giving me a good laugh with the crazy stuff that's thrown into the animal noises. And so that we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
Yes, thank you indeed, Duncan. The animal noises never disappoint. And up next, we have a $24 super chat from Mech Tactical, who says, "I just saw Mark Rober's latest video. Ironic the Ruskies can't put together a precision munition, and yet Rober is successfully dropping intact eggs from space. He should drop one on Vlad with the suggestion, go home." And I gotta say, Mech, Mark Rober is probably smarter than the entire like Russian engineering division put together.
Did you see Colin and Samir? Have you ever watched that show, Matthew? The Colin and Samir show?
Yeah, like the behind the scenes of his new like studio.
Yeah, the Crunch Labs thing.
Yeah, that is like the coolest like studio I've ever seen.
That was so cool. I loved how you had the little trap door thing, you know, where you turn the owl or the eagle and then the little bookshelf moves to the side and you go into the actual
Yes.
building. That was so cool. The guy's really creative. I gotta give Mark Rober a lot of credit. Not only is he really into what he does, but he's also really creative and really cool guy. And Mark Rober, by far, has a lot more in his head in like terms of what he can do and what he's capable of doing than anyone in Russia is capable of doing at all. I would bet $100 that he could probably come up with, well, I wouldn't bet $100. I would bet $1 million that he could come up with an invention to help out the Ukrainian army faster than the Russians could even come up with any kind of new technology at all, even for the domestic sector. Like he is a really smart guy. Speaking of which, just an idea. I don't know if Mark Rober's watching. You know, Funker 530, Ronnie Fitt from Funker 530 one time was watching. So if he was watching, anyone could be watching. But if Mark Rober's watching, I was thinking a pretty cool idea. You know, I'm just saying, if you got an RPG 7 dud. Dummy rocket, I guess is the best thing to call it. Got one of these. What if, because we've already seen the Ukrainians dropping these, Matthew, without fins. What if you made one with fins, but they were remote controlled like an RC plane, so that way you could get a little bit of extra guidance onto, say, a tank's turret or its turret hatch?
Yeah, maybe so. You're saying Mark Rober should do that?
Yeah, you know, like, not for...
I mean, that would go like against all of his like family-friendly guidelines and everything. The advertisers would be like, "Oh, whoa."
I'm not saying he does it for YouTube. I'm saying he does it for the Ukrainian army. You know, like just as something on the side.
Well, I mean, we'd want to see it.
Well, I mean, like, that's true. Maybe he could put it on something like Patreon or something, you know, like if you want to see...
Oh, no, that's an idea.
Yeah, if you want to see the crazy stuff I do, put it on Patreon. But I think if anyone could do it, it would be Mark Rober for sure. Mark Rober is a incredible guy with what he does. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support and allowing us to give a lot of credit to one of the coolest YouTubers out there, Mark Rober. I get a lot of respect for him. He's a cool guy. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, I think this is our last one of this segment. It's another one from Mech Tactical, who puts in another $24 super chat. He says, "My friends, fret not over the mud. A lot of stuff doesn't work well in the mud, like artillery and Russian vehicles. Tree logs and rubbish can be put in the bottom of the trenches to make it more hospitable."
And I thank you so much for the support, but I do fret for the mud, because one thing that's certain is that while the Ukrainians have been able to really rig out these trenches, and I gotta say this because I gotta be fair here, the Ukrainians, when they built those things like the saunas and the dugouts and the bunkers and stuff where you walk down some stairs and then into these really cool little like places, you know, like beds in them and stuff, drainage was never a consideration there. And so all the water that melts from the snow in these areas, and then it starts to puddle up in these trenches, it's going to go to the lowest places in these trenches, and some of those places are the best made places in these trenches. They're now made completely unusable because of the water in the mud that's now going to be pretty much flowing in there with the water. So, I mean, I do understand what you're saying, but the Ukrainians, neither did the Russians. None of them have made their trenches suitable for muddy conditions, incredibly muddy conditions that will persist for months on end. So I don't really think that it's going to be something that can be brushed off by either side. It's something that we really haven't looked at or considered until we saw all of the pictures coming out of Bakhmut and how bad it's looking there. And I think that for both sides now, it's not, we may even see, considering this, that a lot of offensives that the Ukrainians and the Russians may have had planned, or defensive operations, may almost be entirely put on hold for a good while as they both try and rotate out their units as much as possible and just make sure that their soldiers don't end up becoming casualties due to trench rot or in other kinds of diseases that they're going to be getting from these trenches, and how poorly they were made and how poorly they were, I guess you could say, constructed with the idea of drainage in mind. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, and I thank you so much for the support. But in this one, I'm going to have to say that the mud is going to be a serious hindrance for both sides. It's going to be terrible. But thank you so much once again for the support and adding in your 2 bits, because you may be right. It may not be that bad at all. The Ukrainians might actually be able to bring in some pumps, because that's what a lot of World War I trenches would do, is that they would have pumps running to make sure that the water didn't get too bad in some places, but usually that was somewhat rare still. But thank you so much once again for the support and the input, and I think that was the last one of this segment. And so now it's time, and I'm also noticing that our news is going way over time, Matthew. It's 11:14, and we haven't even gotten to Kherson or the speech from Zelenskyy, so we're almost like 20 minutes overtime. So now it's time for me to start double timing through this news and move on into Avdiivka, where we saw the Russians getting obliterated again. You see here a Russian APC moving along an open area in a tree line. And we now see that it got slammed. And it's now burning. You know, I'm going to be honest with y'all. I sat here and I just heard myself kind of have a voice crack a little bit where I said slammed, and it was so high pitched, and I'm kind of getting annoyed with the high pitched stuff, so I think we're going to start toning that back a little bit. But anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of news in the Donetsk area near Pisky, where we saw the Russians once again firing an ungodly amount of incendiary weapons onto the Ukrainian forces and maybe even civilians below. And so here's the video. That's probably the most incendiaries I've ever seen in a single barrage. I hope the Ukrainians below find cover, and hopefully there's no civilians in the area as well. If so, that's a war crime. Well, that we're now going to be moving on into the next area of the front lines. We haven't seen a lot of activity in Donetsk, but moving further south to the area of Pamfilivka and Yakharivka, we did see something very cool. We saw this Ukrainian drone, we're watching the camera of the Ukrainian drone, fly down on top of a Russian one and knock it out.
That's a Russian drone down there?
Yeah, that's the Russian DJI Mavic right there.
That's wild.
And we see this one lining up, trying to knock it out.
Man, if they can hit that, that is insane.
Oh, and they will. They're going to take it out here in a second. The little drone's going. And then the Ukrainian drone is still flying, and it took down the DJI Mavic.
Where'd it go, though? They didn't show it going to the ground.
Sadly, we didn't get to see it, but one thing we did see is that those rotors got messed up on the right side, and that thing tilted over, and that was the end of it. It probably flipped over at that point and couldn't flip itself back upright. So it was somewhere falling to the ground, but we really don't know where. With that, it's now time for us to move on from the Donetsk area, well, actually from the southern front near Pavlivka and Yakharivka, and onto the area of Staromaisk, where we saw that NAFO got a special mention. From SemiRocket.com, of all places. Cannon McCannon face. And if our good man Super Bonker is here tonight, NAFO got a shout out. Gonna have to mute this, but we can see them standing in front of the gun, posing. You know, they did that man dirty right there. Did you see that, Matty? He was running into frame to do the muscle thing too, and then they cut him out. What a bunch of douches.
Wow.
We now see them showing off the gun. Cannon McCannon face. We now see them getting ready to fire it. They've now elevated the piece.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Wait, I forgot. And then boof. We now see them about to fire the gun, and they fired it. A lot of dust came off that piece as well. And also, this looks like it may have been filmed a little bit earlier in the year. And we're finally seeing the footage now. We now see them firing the piece again. Or at least preparing to. And we can see that they're censoring this guy's face with a super bonker. Or the Keems, as it should be called. We now see them firing it again. And again. Oh, what, whoa, wait a minute, go back. We got a Keems alert right here. Look at this. Boop. It was literally one frame, but we saw it for just 1 second. Also, Brian V said, I see a lot of streamers using them now after the Enforcer did. You know, we were actually joking about that, I think, the night that we showed that. I was like, there's people out there who are going to be furiously writing down on the notepad that they need to get this done. But I think that this was done by Simon Rocket, like they did for us, just out of their kindness and all. That was a little bit. We're going to have to stop there right there. Sadly, I can't show off the rest of their merchandise because of that one. But with that, that's the end of the video. But still... it's funny to see that in some places, because it's like, you know, it's kind of interesting because we did it and then other people did. But anyways, you know, it is what it is. It's just good to know that SimonRocket.com, there's a lot of people out there watching all kinds of Ukraine war YouTubers all around YouTube, and then they are watching and showing their appreciation for what we've been doing out here, like they did for us. And so with that, we're now moving on to the area of Huilopol, where we saw a Caliber missile flying right over some Ukrainian troops. And everyone's laughing about that thing at the end of that video.
Кит, ебать. Это самолет или ракета, ебать?
You see them walking down the road. And then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, look, it's a caliber. It just flies right over their head, all quiet and stuff. They're just like, look, a caliber.
Ебать.
Why was it just so weird? It's like I was going for a Sunday stroll or something up there, and everyone just watched it fly over and like, oh crap.
It was pretty quiet too.
Сука, это, пида. Ебать.
It's just so bizarre to see it just flying in the middle of nowhere like that. Anyways, with that, it's now time for us to move on from the southern front. Not a lot of activity going on there. It's now time for us to move into the southern banks of the Kherson River, where we saw that the Ukrainians have now decided to also start knocking out Russian equipment down here too. They're not safe wherever they go. And so here's the video. We see a Russian truck and also the Mr. artillery piece sitting here in the open. The truck probably being used to carry the munitions and also the piece itself. And we can see some Russians running for what appears to be trenches or an area away from the artillery piece and the truck. We see one guy climbing in the truck and now closing the door. He's now backing the truck up. He's moving with some due haste, I guess you could say. That sounded very posh of me. But we can now see him backing the truck up, spinning it around the tree line, and he's now moving it very close to the Mr. B again. A bad sign of things to come. And now that Mr. B got hit, it's now going up in a ball of flames, and now this truck driver is debating whether he should keep backing up towards the inferno or drive away. And it looks like he's decided that he's going to drive away. We now see it getting hit a second time. A little puff of smoke coming off the piece. And with that, that's the end of the video. But it looks like we saw one Russian finally using a little bit of common sense and driving away from the fires and the explosions instead of driving into them. With that, we're now going to be moving into the area of Kherson, where we also saw the Ukrainians were firing a javelin across the Kherson River. Kind of bizarre, but honestly, I can't really blame them. That's actually kind of cool. So here's the video. See them lining up the javelin in a house. Looking out over the distance, lining up the shot. Also, Enigma, I think what you're talking about is a Mr. S. That would be the STG version. There's actually a artillery piece called the Mr. B, and it looks like a very elongated version of the M777, which is what we saw in that last video. We see him still lining up the shot. He is making sure to line this thing up well. He's now fired. The missile's on its way.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, brother. Well, you see the river right out there. And it's traveling. What's it going to hit? I think he just hit right there. Oh, wait, no, it hit right there.
Yes.
And then we heard him at the end go, yeah, we hit it. And so with that, that's the end of the video. And it's pretty cool to see that they're now using javelins from houses to fire across the river and at the Russians over there if they're ever visible. And so with that, it's now time to move to our last bit of news from Ukraine before we get to the speech from President Zelenskyy, where we saw that Kherson was bombarded overnight on day 275. And so, here's the video, but the barrage was hellish.
Тикаем, Витя. Блядь, надо за Олькой сейчас идти. Да ебать, ты шо?
Oh, dogs and everything.
Я сейчас пойду за ней. Вот это да.
It's, of course, it didn't take long for the Russians. And, the Russians call the citizens of Kherson their people. They annexed them, technically, in a 93% in favor of being annexed vote. And, now they're going to start barraging Russian people, according to them, because they just love them that much. And we all knew that it would only be a matter of time before the hundreds of thousands of people who are still living in Kherson started to become targets of the Russians, because they're the closest thing that the Russians can commit an atrocity on the easiest. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from the area of Kherson, and we're now going to be moving north into the city of Kyiv, where we actually have one more bit of news before we get to the speech from President Zelenskyy, where we saw more missiles flying into Kyiv on day 275, and we could also hear the air defenses trying to intercept them. And so, here's the video. You hear the missile flying over. We can't really see it due to the heavy cloud cover, but we hear the AA fire opening up in the distance.
Да он хуярил рядом. Пиздец.
You now see them looking around. But you see a plume of smoke coming from the distance over there, probably where another missile hit.
Ще одна
You hear
полетіла.
another missile flying over. Once again, can't really see it. But we hear the AA firing at it again. We haven't heard an explosion yet. We don't know where that missile is gone.
Йобки, йобані, сука.
And with that, that's the end of the video. But once again, the Russians are mercilessly pounding major cities like Kyiv, trying to knock out all of the critical infrastructure and leave the Ukrainians without power, without electricity, without gas, without water, and completely starve the Ukrainians into submission and hope that that pressures the government into surrendering to the Russians. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our last bit of news for the day, which is the address from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 277 of the war. And so, here's the video.
Незламні народи незламної країни. Сьогодні ми провели перший міжнародний саміт з продовольчої безпеки. Провели у Києві разом з нашими партнерами і свідомо саме цими днями, коли ми вшановуємо пам'ять жертв Голодомору 1932-33 років. Українці пройшли через геноцид, і сьогодні ми робимо все можливе і неможливе, щоб зупинити нову геноцидну політику Росії. Нову, але таку схожу на ту, яка убила мільйони людей у 20 столітті. І ми не просто відбиваємось від агресії, ми крок за кроком створюємо систему, яка зупинить агресію, демонтує її наслідки і гарантуватиме довготривалу безпеку. Безпеку Україні, всій Європі та світу. Продовольча безпека – один з ключових елементів глобальної стабільності. Це те, в чому лідерська роль України проявляється найочевидніше. Завдяки нашій експортній зерновій ініціативі з 3 чорноморських портів ми відправили на світовий ринок близько 12 мільйонів тонн продовольства – 40 країн світу. Із цього обсягу більше 2,5 мільйонів тонн країнам, у яких не просто дефіцит продовольства, а жорстка криза. В рамках продовольчої програми ООН ми допомогли країнам, в яких буквально люди голодують або на межі голоду. Це, зокрема, Ефіопія, Ємен. Також ми допомагали Сомалі і Афганістану. І це тільки початок. Сьогодні ми офіційно оголосили про старт нашої нової ініціативи гуманітарної «Grain from Ukraine». І маємо домовленості вже з багатьма партнерами про спільну роботу. Зерно з України. Євросоюз, США, Франція, Британія, Німеччина, Японія, Катар, Канада, Норвегія, Нідерланди, Фінляндія, Бельгія, Литва, Чехія, Італія, Австрія, Іспанія, Швеція, Словенія, Швейцарія та інші. Наш саміт з продовольчої безпеки підтримало більше 20 держав. Загальна сума, яку ми акумулювали для Grain from Ukraine, вже близько 150 мільйонів доларів. Робота продовжується. Готуємо до 60 кораблів. Всі ми разом не просто відправляємо українську агропродукцію тим країнам, які найбільше страждають від продовольчої кризи. Ми підтверджуємо, що ніколи більше голод не має використовуватись як зброя. Якби не українське продовольство, якби не наше спільне з партнерами лідерство, то соціальну стабільність у таких регіонах, як Північ Африки або Близький Схід, не вдалося би втримати. Саме цього хотіла Росія. Маємо і можемо цього не допустити. Сьогодні ж я зустрівся з прем'єр-міністром Бельгії. Обговорили наші спільні дії і не лише заради продовольчої безпеки. Підписали декларацію щодо підтримки Бельгією повноправного членства України і в Європейському Союзі, і в НАТО. Це важливий сигнал. Обговорили подальшу політичну і оборонну взаємодію, санкції проти Росії, можливості Бельгії допомогти нам з проходженням цієї зими. Сьогодні ж у Києві відбулася зустріч Люблінського трикутника на рівні прем'єрів. Україна, Польща і Литва підписали спільну заяву щодо подальшої підтримки України і міжнародного правопорядку. Тож сьогодні дуже насичений дипломатичний день. День, який зміцнив і Україну, і наших партнерів. Цієї доби наші енергетики продовжили відновлення системи і маємо вже більше можливостей генерувати і постачати електрику. Але, на жаль, ще недостатньо, щоб зробити постачання повністю стабільним. Станом на ранок вже вдвічі менше абонентів, ніж вчора ввечері, були відключені від електрики. Втім, в 14 областях і в Києві все ще діють обмеження для більш ніж 100 тисяч абонентів в кожному з регіонів. Якщо ввечері споживання зросте, кількість відключень може збільшитись. Це ще раз говорить про те, наскільки важливо зараз берегти енергію і споживати її раціонально. Сьогодні вдень ворог завдав ракетного удару по Дніпропетровщині, по приватному сектору, по звичайних будинках. Є поранені. Обстрілювали Донеччину, Південь, інші регіони. Росія і цей день, День пам'яті, перетворює на День терору. Окупанти обов'язково відповідатимуть за все це. І ми виженемо їх з нашої землі. І ще одне. Сьогодні нам вдалося звільнити з російського полону ще 12 українців, із них 3 цивільні, 2 офіцери, 7 рядові та сержанти. Лише за цей тиждень ми повернули в Україну 98 наших людей з полону. Повернемо усіх інших. Дякую усім, хто нам допомагає. Дякую кожному лідеру, який працює разом із нами заради європейської глобальної безпеки. Слава нашим воїнам і нашому незламному народу. Вічна пам'ять усім, хто віддав життя за Україну. Слава Україні! І, будь ласка, сьогодні вшануйте пам'ять українців і українок, дітей і дорослих, чиї життя були забрані голодомором, геноцидом.
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and that also wraps up our day 275, 76, and 77 summary of the war in Ukraine. I thank you all so much once again for watching, and if you all did enjoy the stream, please make sure to hit the like button, comment in the on the stream once it turns into a video, and also subscribe. All of those things help us out a whole load, and both helping to keep this news running and also making sure that it spreads to more people. And so with that, thank you to all of y'all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to cover the news tonight to all of y'all. And it's now time for us to move into the question segment, so that way we can answer all of the super chats that have been sent in, and thank everyone for helping this channel to keep running, and also get to as many live chats as possible. And so with that, guide us into the question segment, Matthew.
You're right. So real quick, we do have one more poll to go over. Simply because of time constraints, I've only put up one extra poll. So the question on this one is, do you think the war is stagnating? Is there still significant momentum by Ukraine? It looks like 53% said yes, Ukraine is still moving fast. 19% said not sure. And 29% said no, the momentum is stagnating. Now for me, I'm going to have to go with the 29%. I don't think Ukraine is slowing down to the point we should be concerned, but I think it is starting to slow down a little bit. I don't think they're moving as fast as they were about a week ago, but they're still making really good progress even at that. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, I think that the Ukrainians are kind of slowing down. They're not really slowing down all the way. Of course, it takes a good while for an offensive to come into being. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of effort on the supply side. Takes a lot of preparation for the units. And so we're probably going to see an offensive occur in the future, but for now it looks like they're not really moving much. Over the past 3 days, we were not running a stream for 72 hours, and over 72 hours the front line has not changed 1 inch. And that kind of says a good bit about them slowing down, but also it doesn't say that they've entirely stopped, because you got to remember, for a good while, the front line was completely stagnant everywhere, in both Balaklia and Kherson, the southern front in Donetsk as well. And then we saw in just a matter of days that these front lines would have massive amounts of movement, where the Russians would be pushed back dozens of miles, and then the front line would stop again and not move. So it's really hard to determine whether it is moving fast or not anymore, because when it moves, and when it doesn't, it just sits still. But I would largely have to go with, we're not really seeing as much movement as we have been seeing for about the past few weeks. And so with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well. And if you have anything to add to it, feel free, Matthew. And if not, let's get into those super chats. And also, how many of them do we have?
All right. So it looks like we have about, let's see here, about 20 super chats and about 24 live chats. So a decent bit to go. And also, just to let everybody know, I have been seeing your chats about what's going on in China right now. That's quite interesting. I honestly would not have expected that to be happening in quite large numbers like it's happening. It looks like people are challenging Xi Jinping's power because they're tired of getting locked down in their apartments for COVID. But that's quite interesting. So I'll be interested to see how that turns out, and maybe the enforcer will find out some more news about it. But in the meantime, let's move on to our first super chat, which is from Jose Diaz. And Jose, hopefully you're still around. I saw you getting off for the night. But he puts in a $20 donation and says, greetings from Arecibo, Puerto Rico, at Enforcer and Enforcer Matt and the LSA. I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving, and thanks again for your brotherly and unwavering support to Ukraine. Gloria, a lost heroes, why a Ukrainia?
And thank you so much once again for the support, Jose, our representative of the Lee Spring Army in Puerto Rico. And that is really cool to hear that you thanked us for I will hope that we had a good Thanksgiving. Not thanked us, but hope we had a good one. We had a great one, actually. I had a whole bunch of fun on Thanksgiving, had a good bit of food, and also started to throw around new video ideas. I'm always very reluctant, to throw out video ideas, because I feel like most of the time I throw out ideas that I would like to do, and then I never get to them, either because I don't have time or I'm tired and then I don't really feel like doing them when I have the time, one reason or the other. But I have been throwing around some video ideas in the background and seeing about fleshing out this channel from just Ukraine into all kinds of other stuff. That's something that I've been thinking about doing for a while. Hopefully a lot of y'all would enjoy watching the stuff we'd come out with. And I think, because college is actually going to be dying down here in the next week for me. Finals week is this upcoming week. Like, it starts like pretty much the day after tomorrow on Monday. And so after that week, I really have nothing to do for about a month until college starts up again. And so I was thinking I could probably start getting into really hardcore again videos, like normal videos. And I was thinking, instead of trying to make them high editing effort, just sit here and talk on a computer screen, or pull out a camera, since a lot of y'all want to see us in person again and on camera, and talk on camera and then show my screen a little bit too, because I think that'd be pretty cool. But I'll just have to see how that goes.
That was my idea.
Yeah, I mean, like, we could both make the same videos. What could be wrong? It's not like we're infringing on anyone's video ideas or anything. We're the same channel. But anyways, also, I've had a whole bunch of ideas. I have this really interesting idea I think would be fun. And I don't know, maybe y'all find this fun too. But the United States is where I live, and it's a very big country. Each state's a little bit different. And while I would like to travel around the world, I know a lot of people would like for me to do this to their country, and maybe in the future, if it went really well, I could do this. But I think it would be pretty cool to visit each state and find something interesting to do in each one. Maybe travel in between the major cities and make like stops along the way in the smaller towns to get a look at what they look like, or maybe just drop by specific towns that either have a very bad reputation or a very interesting reputation. Like, for example, I was thinking maybe for the first thing I could do, since it's nearby, maybe I could go into Mountain Brook and show y'all Mountain Brook, since that's like, I believe it's actually the third richest area in the United States, and for some reason it's right on the south of Birmingham, which is really weird when you think about it, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it's still there, and it's as far as I know, it's true. So I think that'd be pretty interesting to show y'all. Maybe even show y'all a place like let's see, what do they call it? Fairfield? I think it's somewhere in here. Yeah, there it is, Fairfield, which is, according to the statistics, the most dangerous place in Alabama. And just show y'all places like that, or maybe do the whole state as like a big 50-minute episode where I travel around the whole thing and I go from Alabama to another state. Not really a travel blog, I'm not really talking about like going and be like, hey guys, we're gonna like drink boba tea and go on a ride at a carnival. No, I'm talking about like showing y'all like real life in these states, like, go to Atlanta, or maybe even like a place like San Francisco, you know, where they talk about, you know, the crime rate's really high, you know, like there's all kinds of problems, and go there and see if it's true. And then, you know, travel around the rest of the state at the same time and look into the country areas and see if you know, like, what's that like? You know, really kind of like a adventure kind of video where you travel around and see what each state's like and kind of give a general summary of what the first impression was of traveling around the whole thing. I think that'd be a pretty cool idea. It would take a decent amount of time to make each video. You know, honestly, it would probably be like a once a month kind of thing, or maybe even longer to do, because, you know, you'd have to go there, and once you get away from Alabama, you know, it would be a pretty decent length to travel. You'd be out there for a while. I don't know. I mean, like, I think that would be a cool video idea. I thought that would be really cool, really neat. Maybe do things along the way, like maybe like a prank. I'm not talking about like the pranks you see on YouTube where people like punch someone in the face and then tell them it's a prank. I find those pranks to kind of be silly, you know. But other things like maybe pranks or maybe giving away something. But I thought those would be really neat. I thought a lot of people might enjoy that, and I also thought it would be really cool because you can go around and take a look at the entire country, state by state, place by place. But, you know, those are all just ideas that are being thrown up in the air. I have no idea if it would ever be possible or if I'd ever be able to do them. But I do know one thing: the end of college, the end of the semester is coming around, and I can make more normal videos. So hopefully I can get to that. But with that, thank you so much once again for the support. Host ideas. Your super chat didn't really talk about future video ideas and everything. You just asked me if I enjoyed Thanksgiving and then started talking about video ideas. But I thank you so much once again for the support, Host ideas. If you're still on, I don't know if you're still on or not, but thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Right. And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Squamous Tarkus, who's also a channel legend, who says, do you think the decrease in tank losses are due to the scarcity of remaining tanks to destroy, or a calculated slowdown of aggression because of drawing new battle lines? Love you guys, and Woo Pig Sui.
And thank you so much for the support, and Woo Pig Sui. I love Woo Pig Sui. And to answer that question, I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a combination of frontline activity somewhat dying down, and I also think that these new offensives, the small probing attacks that the Russians are doing in most areas of the front, may be almost completely devoid of armor. We may be seeing that these are entirely infantry pushes supported by artillery, and there's almost no armor involved. We haven't got any hardcore information, though, to back up that assessment, but usually whenever we saw large offensives and pushes on the front lines, it was automatically correlated that the tank and armored personnel carrier fatalities, or I guess you could say knockouts, would rise along with it. But we're not seeing that this time. So either these pushes are so small and so limited in scale that there's very few tanks for the Ukrainians to destroy, or these units are completely devoid of tanks, really, and some of them are so dated that they're not even being used on the front line. Or it could be that they are stabilizing the front lines and they're keeping those things in reserve. One of the three, but I'm not really sure which one it would be. All of them really come to logical ends. It's just really which direction you would think the Russians would move in. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that addresses the question fairly well. And who pig sweet. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $13 super chat from Mike D, who says, in your lifetime, do you foresee a Russia that is not a secretive propaganda police state? Also, Cannon McCannonface is a homage to Bodie McBoatface.
And thank you so much for the support. Also cool to hear that, because I didn't know where that really came from, but I still thought it was neat. And I thought that Super Bonker would like it. I haven't seen Super Bonker in here tonight.
I haven't either.
Hopefully he watches this tomorrow on replay. If you do, put a comment in the comment section and let us know you saw that, because I put that in here entirely for you. But moving on from that, I think, can you reread that one again real quick, just to make sure I answer it correctly?
Mike said, in your lifetime, do you foresee a Russia that is not a secretive police state? Also, Cannon McCannonface is homage to Bodie McBoatface.
Okay, so I answered that last part. So now on to the first part. I do not see a Russia that is not secretive. Russia will always be this way. It was this way during the Tsarist times. It was this way during the Soviet times. It was this way during the Russian Federation times. It's been like this throughout all of history. And it's something I don't think will really change. I honestly think it's something that is a bit of a cultural issue with Russia, because we've never seen a government in Russia that survived that allowed, I guess you could say, dissent or the truth. The only government we saw of that kind would be Gorbachev's reign during the 80s, and that literally killed the Soviet Union. And you can see right there that the ideas of free speech and also, I guess you could say, the lessening of like oppression pretty much leads to the collapse of whatever Russian government's there. And then a similar monster to the one that got killed off before rises up in its place and takes the spot. So I don't think that we'll ever see a Russia that is unsecretive and not oppressive to their people, because historically it's never worked. The only time that it was really tried, it just completely failed. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support, because it helps this channel to keep on running. And also, it was really cool to hear about the whole Bodie McBoat face thing, but I actually didn't know what that meant. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and next up, big shout out to Gandalf TW for putting in a $10 super chat, but without a comment. Gandalf, I know you are a channel legend. You just don't interact a whole bunch in the live chat, but I have seen you around for a very long time. I think you were here before me, actually. So definitely a channel legend, and thank you very much for that support.
Absolutely.
And for sure, would you like to add anything to it?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much for the support. Didn't leave a comment, but still, the support says a lot, and it helps this channel to keep on running. And so I got to thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep alive. And Matthew is right. As far as I remember, you've been here ever since the dawn of time. Ever since the light first came on this channel and started running on the Ukraine war, I think you've been here. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Cliff H, who says, welcome back and glad you had a break. Any intel on what happens, if anything, to the thousands of Russian bodies that must be littering the landscape around Bakhmut?
They rot. It's a sad fact. A lot of them don't get picked up, and the Ukrainians don't find them often a lot, or they're in places where they really can't grab them and collect them, and so the bodies just sit there and rot. I'm not going to get into a lot of details, because based off of the way I answered the last one about the First World War in Okinawa, a lot of people are eating, and I don't want to get into too much graphic detail while people are eating, because I know that it must make people feel queasy. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. But they really just sit around. Most sides really don't do anything with them. They just kind of sit there until people either find them, or they just sit there until they are not there anymore. And so with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well, and that honestly, that also gives you a pretty good idea of the stench that's probably permeating the air in some places around Bakhmut. But with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from James Dunn, who says, I've heard that artillery is very good at inflicting casualty on the enemy due to not really knowing if the shell they just fired killed anyone. How do you think drones change that?
Drones change that a lot, because artillery no longer is called in by spotters on the front line or units that are under direct fire. It's called in by a drone, sometimes from a unit that's under direct fire, but the ability to have the drone in a bird's eye view looking down onto the battlefield and where those rounds are landing helps the artillery to know what kind of damage they're actually inflicting, and it also allows the infantry to also have a really good idea of what they're now going to be facing after that barrage is over. And so I think that drones have added a whole extra level of information, which is very important in a war. The two most important things in war is we're getting 0 kilobytes a second, and it reconnected. Yip, yip. But anyways, that is probably what kind of effect it's having, is that the infantry and the artillery are able to actually gauge how much damage they're actually doing to that unit by visually seeing it from a bird's eye view. Also, World War I, deaths by weapons. Let's see here. So, here's what's interesting. In World War I, 60% of the battlefield casualties were caused by artillery shells. 60%. 2 out of every 3 people that got maimed or killed in the First World War were maimed or killed by artillery. It was only 30% of the deaths that came from gunfire, and only less than 1% that came from bayonet. So it actually shows you, really, I guess, how devastating artillery is beforehand. And I'm sure that adding dead-on, precise viewpoints of what the artillery is doing, adds extra dealing a percentage towards the artillery and what kind of casualties it can cause to an enemy force. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well and also throws up some stats. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running.
Yes, indeed. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Blue Flam 777, another channel legend, who says a friend in Ukraine, quote unquote, "Hi, what is going on?" The other person says, "Well, Russia at war with NATO here. How does it look? Russia lost a cruiser, over 800 tanks, 85,000 soldiers, and NATO did not arrive yet, I think."
Oh, that's a burn. And it's true. It's the craziest thing. NATO weaponry arrived, but NATO's never arrived, and the Ukrainians are still blasting them away. And I really think that shows that while training has a good deal to do with how effective a force can be, I think that it also comes down a lot more to technology in general. Because we can see that the Ukrainians, they're well trained, sure, but I would still say that at the very beginning of the war, in the first opening months, they weren't trained as well as Western forces, and that's why we saw that now the Ukrainians have a constant rotation of soldiers going to Western countries like Britain and learning how to fight and then coming back, and their fighting prowess becomes even better. So I would certainly have to say, not only is that a good joke, but it's also incredibly true, and I can back that up. I am the enforcer, and I approve this message. And so with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Susie Q, who says, "Did you know that Zelenskyy has managed to write a book during this war? I think it was released, or excuse me, I think it was just released. Of course, I will purchase it. Thank you and Matt for your informative and entertaining perspectives." And thank you, Susie.
And thank you so much for the support, Susie. And I have not heard that Zelenskyy made a book in this war, but I will try and look into it and see if I can find some more information about it. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one is from Mech Tactical once again. This time he puts in a $10 donation. He says, maggots are bad. Let's see here. He said, beep, 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 beep. Can't stop the LSA. Smile and take my money.
And I thank you for the support, Mech Tactical. Thank you for being very forward with that. And thank you for helping this channel to keep on running. We will take it because it helps us to stay alive behind the scenes. And it helps us to keep on thinking into the future. And also I see Aldo. He's said this like, I think twice. Let me check. No. Actually, he's only said it once. He's like, more impersonations. We probably will do a little bit more. But thank you so much once again, Mech Tactical. And I would say maggots are pretty bad. They're so gross. Just the sight of a maggot makes me sick, and I can't imagine a field crawling with maggots. Like that would just, I don't know how I'd react with that. I think honestly that would scar me more than seeing bodies at this point. It's just a field of writhing maggots. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. And I do see what Matthew bleeped out there, and sadly I cannot respond to that one. But I do know what you're talking about with the Sign My Rocket video. But with that, thank you so much once again, and thanks to your support, we will be able to keep this channel running. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from David Kotik, who says, "Please read Chapter 1 in Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder and force her to understand why today was a big Memorial Day, Ukraine today."
And I thank you for the support, and I will make sure to try and read that book in the future. But sadly, I cannot do that right now. But thank you so much once again, and I will try and look into that. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Mr. Awesome Noob, who says people are making comparisons between Bakhmut and Passchendaele, but Bakhmut has passed up Passchendaele by 2 days.
That is true. It is longer in length in terms of the battle, but the Battle of Passchendaele, and there was actually several battles of Passchendaele, but let me put this in real quick. Battle of Passchendaele would have been higher in casualties, I believe. Let me check. Also, the pictures from the Battle of Passchendaele are apocalyptic, but let's see here. Casualties and losses. The British and the French took anywhere in between 240,000 to 448,000 killed and wounded, and the Germans took about an equal number as well. So, yeah, I mean, I would have to say the Battle of Passchendaele may have only lasted 3 months, a week, and 3 days, but the amount of losses there, on the high end, almost 1 million soldiers on both combined sides were wounded or killed in that single 3-month-long battle. And that doesn't even get close to the Russian and Ukrainian casualties combined. If you combine both of those, and this gives you an idea of how destructive World War I really was on a day-to-day basis with how many soldiers were getting killed. If you combine the Russian wounded and killed and the Ukrainian wounded and killed, you might just be able to get into the window of how many losses the British and the French took during the Battle of Passchendaele. And, oh man, you know, like, hell, you gotta imagine, all those people died. Oh, well, died and were wounded, almost 1 million of them, within 3 months' time, in one small area that looked like this. And you can just imagine how many bodies were probably sitting out here that we can't see in this picture, among these broken trees and the muddy, cratered fields. And it's a horrendous thing to think about, because the stench is terrible, the sights are terrible, the sounds are terrible. There's probably people out there who are wounded during the battles, you know, or when the battles end, and they're just crying for help and no one can really get out to them. It's just horrendous, but, you know, it was its own thing. The First World War was its own thing, and honestly, I would have to say, and this is something kind of weird, World War I is known as the war to end all wars, which it wasn't, because it didn't end wars, but I think it ended the brutality of quick, very short battles, because when you really think about it, a 3-month battle in Passchendaele is not really that long, especially compared to modern battles. Like, for example, hell, I mean, like, you can look at, like, right now in Ukraine, you know, like, the Battle of Kherson went on for practically months on end, like 6 to 7 months. The Battle of Kyiv went on for about 3 or 4 months, and those are incredibly long. Those are considered normal length at this point. Mariupol lasted for 3 whole months, and Passchendaele was one of the longer battles in the First World War, and it collapsed that idea of I guess you could say shorter length. I guess you could say quick, high casualty kind of events, like, for example, Waterloo or Gettysburg, where tens of thousands of people would die in the course of a day or two, and it started to drag it out over months. And so, I would say World War I was kind of the war to end all wars, in the way that the brutality wasn't a short stint anymore. It wasn't just a couple of days. It ended up being months on end. And Passchendaele was one of the first examples of that, moving on into the Second World War and up till today. Now you see that all of the battles just go on forever. But with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support, and also bringing up that the Battle of Passchendaele is actually now shorter than the Battle of Bakhmut.
All right, and up next, we have a $6 super chat from Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin, who says, I just joined in. Sorry for being late. And also, you were forgiven. Brief me in, please. Good news only. And also, where were you yesterday, huh?
And I thank you for the support. And I was actually taking a break yesterday. I had announced it a couple of days in advance that we were going to be taking Thanksgiving and Black Friday off. And I actually should have put an announcement on the community page for that on the YouTube channel and in the Discord, but I didn't do that for some reason. I don't know why, but that's where I was, and it was a nice break. Now, to get to the filling in, over the past 3 days, we haven't seen a lot of frontline activity, but the Russians are, at this point, conducting 3 probing attacks, one in the northeastern area near Kremenna, one in the area of Bakhmut, and also one in the area of Avdiivka. And it appears that they're making no ground, and these offensives are very small in size, only about 3 to 4 BTGs each. And so going off of that, it looks like the Russians are doing probing attacks that are very limited in scope. It may not even have an objective. It's just trying to find weaknesses in the Ukrainian lines. And that's really all that's happened. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does fill you in. And also, you are totally fine if you're late. You're totally fine if you're watching the stream when it's not even live. I'm just happy that everyone's here and watching it. It means a lot to me that a lot of people watch this news and enjoy it and appreciate it, because, you know, I would hate to know that I run this and then no one watches it and no one likes it or anything, you know, because it makes it kind of sad and a little depressing to run the news. But with that, I thank you so much once again just for being here, regardless whether you're late or not. I'm just happy you're here. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
Right, and next up, we have a $5 super chat from GNF, He says, I got my first job working at Boston Market during Thanksgiving. Was tough, but made it. Will the UN hold a vote to deem Russia a terrorist state?
Hey, and good job on getting your first job at Boston Market. I think I've heard of that place before, man.
Is that a grocery store?
I think it's a restaurant chain.
Oh, man, a restaurant.
A restaurant. What have we got in here? Oh, it looks pretty good.
Oh, that looks good. Now, Unfortunate knows about restaurants.
Oh, yeah, I do. I actually was a server at one. I won't say which one, though, because it was literally just a single one. But, like, when I mean a single one, it wasn't a chain. It was literally just its own individual restaurant. But, man, the food here looks good. Like, little rolls, the chicken, the ribs, mashed potatoes. I don't like how that gravy's, like, seeping over the side of the bowl. That's, like, get a towel or something. Corn fries? What is that? I don't know. And then broccoli. Oh, that's cornbread too. That's not sweet rolls. That's cornbread. But this stuff looks good, man. And also congratulations on getting your first job. For the first job is always the funnest one because it's like the first time you ever do it, so it's really fun. But I'll say this though, my personal experience. Have boundaries because one thing I always tried to do in my jobs was be incredibly polite, and so my politeness ended up being a kind of a hindrance in a way because they would start assigning you to crappier things, like giving you crappier schedules or like crappier work. Like I ended up working at a public store and I was hired on as a cashier, and by the end of the job, I was practically a janitor, and I was never a cashier. I was always cleaning bathrooms. And it was because I would try and politely say stuff and just make sure that if anything starts crossing bounds, like if what you were hired to do or anything like that, you tell them, like just outright, hey, I'm not really a big fan of this. Can you change this? And if they say, sorry, we can't, say, hey, look, I can't do this. Because that's one thing I learned doing a couple of jobs is that if you don't do that, they'll just run over you, and it's really bad how that is sometimes. You know, you would think that people would try and understand that you're being polite and nice and stuff, and just help you out, considering that you're trying to help tell them that. But anyways, congratulations on getting your first job. I hope you have a fun time working there. And also, can you reread his question again real quick?
Yes. 1 second. He said, let's see. Will the UN hold a vote to deem Russia a terrorist state?
I believe the UN probably will not, because if they did, it could of course be vetoed by Russia since they're a member of the Security Council, and they can not be removed from the Security Council. So we probably won't see that. But the European Union did declare them a state sponsor of terrorism, which is a good thing. That's half of the Western sphere acting in unison. So that's a great thing to do. Now we're just one step behind with the United States getting on board, and I think in this one the Europeans are well ahead of us, because declaring Russia a state sponsor of terrorism is just a matter of fact. And I don't know why, because we would have been the first. And it's really hard to not get into exact details and statements here. We would have been the first because it was almost a unanimous vote in Congress. If it wasn't for some reason, the president just going no. I don't understand why that happened. That did not make any sense to me, considering that it went through Congress practically unanimously, which rarely ever happens. And then he just went, oh, no, not really. It's like, what? It's like, they are. Like, everyone in the world is in agreement on this. Why in the world would you say no? That's like saying no on Iran. Like, Iran funds all kinds of terrorist organizations around the world, helps them to keep on living. It's like it would make sense to call him a state sponsor of terrorism, and we do. Why wouldn't we call Russia one? But anyways, it is good to hear that the European Union at least did it, but I don't think the United Nations will do it. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
All right, and we have 10 more super chats to go. And up next, we have a $5 donation from Craig Platel, who says, original up armored Humvees didn't have the hand crank, added weight of armor plates to protect the gunner, made it too hard to rotate without it.
Okay, that is cool to hear, because I thought, honestly, every time I've seen a Humvee, it's always had that little armored basket around it, and so I always thought they had the hand crank. I never knew that they didn't at the time, and that is that's really neat. They, like, it wasn't just the little armored basket being added. They actually had to upgrade the entire ring up there, the turret ring, and actually make it where it had to be hand cranked. So I thank you so much for the support in adding that a little tidbit of information in for us, because I actually didn't know that at all either. And I don't know, Matt. Maybe you knew about it.
Didn't know about that for sure.
And so with that, now both of us having learned something, and I thank you so much for schooling us on it, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $5 super chat from Philip Fixes, who says, it's barrel change time for artillery. What's up with the repair stations the U.S. has set up? My Coffee Fun hoodie is en route. KSC Rocket Garden.
Hey, and I thank you so much for getting a Coffee Fun hoodie. I like the hoodies, and also that was something that I was about to do. I was actually about to get off stream here in a bit and probably get myself some of my own stuff. Because I was looking at some of it, and I was like, man, I'd like to have that hoodie and that hoodie. So I think I'm probably going to go get some too. And also, could you reread the question, Matthew?
Right. And also, it pleases me very much, folks, to go back and look at these old designs. I forgot how they looked. It's been such a long time since I made them. So I'm still glad to see that y'all are all pleased with it. But his question is, it's barrel change time for artillery. What's up with the repair stations the U.S. has set up?
Sadly, I don't know a lot about the repair stations that the U.S. has, or any of the progress with getting Ukrainian guns back to the United States or into a NATO country to be rebored or rebarreled. So unfortunately, I hate to say this, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one, because I don't have a lot of information to give on that. But I do thank you for the support, and I will be trying to find that information in the future. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again, but also I'm really sorry that I couldn't answer that one. But with that, we are on to the next one.
Right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from JR, who says, I guess you could say, could be your trademark phrase and maybe next t-shirt idea. Anyways, love the channel and community and keep it up.
And thank you so much for the support. And sometimes I do get caught into little pitfalls and with wordage, and those are one of the ones. I guess you could say that it's kind of my trademark, saying I guess you could say. I'm just kidding. I actually did that deliberately. Anyways, it is, I honestly, that kind of annoys me a little bit whenever I catch on one, because I'm like, dang, I do that too much. And it's really hard to come up with creative ways to say things most of the time, because we've run thousands of hours of the stream at this point. Let me do the math real quick. 277 days times 3. 277 times 3. We've had 831 hours of stream. And so it is really hard to come up with that, like 831 hours of ways to say things creatively and differently. And I'm very sorry about that. I do try my best to try and change the way we say things, but it's so hard, because you say something one way, and I'm so focused on trying to deliver the Frontline news and stuff, it ends up becoming a solid thing to say. It's just over and over and over. But once again, it is kind of a trademark. So with that, thank you so much once again for the support. We will look into maybe making those into shirts. And with that being said, like Bass both said, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, big shout out to Canadian Pride and also WL for each putting in a $5 donation. And we do appreciate that support very much from both of you. And up next, we have a $5 super chat once again from Craig Platel, who says KC-135 is not developed from the 707. The KC-135 and 707 were developed separately from the prototype Boeing 367-80.
1 second, I gotta look into this. You just told me something that may make me have to run away and cry. Let's see here. Let's see. Was developed from the Boeing 367. Dig nabbit! Dig nabbit! You're right. You're right. I got that wrong. Dang it. Aw, man. Dag nabbit. You're right. I was wrong. It was actually... It was actually a different aircraft. The engines are different. And I'm sure that it wasn't introduced into service with those engines, because those look like modern turbofan engines, not turbojets, because of their size. They're a bit wider, and honestly, they kind of look like 737 sized engines. But, you know, I'm kind of talking on my butt here. I don't know a lot about these specific engines on this KC-135. But one thing I do have to say, in my defense, they look incredibly similar. And that wouldn't be the first time. And if I remember correctly, it wouldn't be the first time that the United States repurposed a normal aircraft and turned it into a fuel tanker. Like, for example, right here, this is literally just a DC-10. really cool plane, but it had a fatal flaw. And if y'all have ever watched air disasters, y'all know that it's the cargo door, and it just blows out. And
The
kills
back
everyone.
cargo door.
Yeah, the rear, like what was it, the left or the right side cargo door that would just blow out.
It's the left side, and I think it's because there was something wrong with the hinges.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, it was like a pressure difference or something, and it forced the thing to just explode outwards and open, and it'd suck everything out
I think
and
so.
literally rip the plane apart mid-flight. But this is literally just a DC-10 that was repurposed as a fueler, and I knew that story about the KC-10, so I thought, in my defense, y'all could still beat the hell out of me with bats and clubs in a minute, but in my defense, I thought it was the exact same thing for the KC-135, because this one was just a repurposed DC-10, and this one had the exact same fuselage, at least it looked like, as a Boeing 707, but with different engines. And so I was like, well, it would be reasonable to assume, and I've always thought this until now, that this was just a repurposed 707. It's apparently not. It's apparently completely separate. Well, it's very similar. I guess you could say it's in the family, the 707 family, but it was designed off the prototype instead, not the actual 707 itself. So with that, I'm sorry about that, everyone. That was actually a mistruth for me, and it actually says that in the first line on Wikipedia. That was a 367-80. Man, the Boeing 707 looks so cool. Also, that was a really cool like livery that Boeing had going on for their, I guess you could say, demonstration aircraft back then. Like, that was a really good one.
Pretty cool, pretty cool.
Like, look at that.
And another question for you folks. Would you rather ride on a Boeing airliner or a Airbus?
Throw that up as a poll right now, Matthew. I want to know the answer to that. Boeing or Airbus?
I know my answer right now, but let's see what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, let's hold our answers, because I think you and me are going to have separate ones. I don't know, though. Wait a minute. What? They have this one? At the Overt Hazy? Oh, what? Dude, that's why I wanted to go to the Overt Hazy when we were in Washington when I was, like, 14. Because this is, like, they have all the cool stuff there. Like, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. has got nothing on the Overt Hazy Center, like, in the middle of Virginia, like, 45 minutes away. But, man, that's so cool. Anyways, thank you so much for the clarification there. I did get that wrong, and I do apologize for that. We don't try and get things wrong as a career on here, but that one was just wrong. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. And we are on to the next one while we gather up information on that poll.
Right. So next up, we have a $5 super chat from Roy CC07, who says, check the International on Wiki. Since China is having massive protest, the transliterations are interesting, and there's sample audio in English, Russia, and instrument.
International.
I don't know if he meant to say instrument, but I don't know what that last part was meant to say.
The international song in English. The lyrics, the international, from Marxist.org. Let's see here. Let's see here. I like how it says on tyrants only will make war, but who defines who's a tyrant? You know, like that's a great one. And I was like such an ambiguous thing. Anyways, honestly, this is a pretty good one, but I think that the best one is the Chinese national anthem itself. Anthem lyrics in English. Hopefully we can find it in English. All right, here we go. Let's see. It's actually not stand up, it's a rise. Those who refuse to be slaves. You know, isn't that a funny lyric? Guess what's going on in China now, isn't that a little funny? Let's see here. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. I mean, like, the first lyric is probably the funniest one because it's literally what China is. Well, at least how Chinese people unfortunately live. And so with that, we are on to the next one. But thank you so much once again for the support in pointing that out.
All right, and up next, big shout out to Dupper Bob for putting in a $2 donation, but without a comment. Dupper Bob, thank you very much for your continued support, and we do appreciate that very much, as usual. And moving right along, we have a $2 super chat from CA Lags, who says, Russian lullabies start la 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 la.
Rock bye baby, rat-ta-ta-ta. La, 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 la.
And then out of nowhere, la 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 la. Boom.
When I was a boy, almost 4 years older than you, back in the war with Ukraine, I got my left eyeball blown up by a Ukrainian sniper. Gee, Dad, that was scary. I know, my little Vladimir. Have a great night, sweet dreams. La 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 la. And then closes the door. Oh man. But yeah. I mean, they probably do end it like that, honestly. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and a pretty good joke we can work off of. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and real quick to go over that poll, Boeing or Airbus for airliner. It looks like 54% said Boeing, 32% said Airbus, and 13% said I'm not sure. Now for me, I want to be careful what I say here. I don't want to say anything out of line, legally speaking, but I'm not very wild about Boeing's track record when it comes to safety. So I would have to pick Airbus any day. And in fact, if I see a Boeing aircraft on a flight, I would purposely not take that flight to go take an Airbus. But Enforcer, what say you?
Well, Matthew, I don't understand that because I thought you were all about maxing the experience. I don't understand what's wrong now, Matthew.
I like to max the experience in the air and not going straight for the ground.
But Matthew, it's all about the max that you can get from the experience. You know, it's like I don't understand, Matthew. Like, wouldn't you want to fly to DC? You know, that would be a max experience. I'm literally throwing up, Matthew, all of the like the 737 Max and the DC-10.
Oh.
You know, like I'm trying to make plays on it. And you're like, what? Like, what do you mean? But also, not to give too much bad credit, the DC-10 was actually a McDonnell Douglas plane when it was having all of these problems, I believe. Let me check that though. Yeah, it was a McDonnell Douglas. When was McDonnell Douglas bought out? Let's see. When was McDonnell Douglas bought by Boeing? 1997. Wow, that was actually recent. Hell. So the Boeing doesn't really get the credit for the DC-10's faults. That would actually be McDonnell Douglas, which is now a defunct company that Boeing bought out. But holy hell, the DC-10 was probably the scariest thing on Earth because no one even knew what was destroying this thing for like a good 2 or 3 years. Like, they would just break up mid-flight and there was nothing anyone could do to investigate it because the plane would be scattered over like 50 miles of ground. You couldn't find all the parts to put together what happened until one time. And I forgot the reason why, Matthew, but one of them actually ripped apart, and all of the parts pretty much fell in a small enough area that they could collect them up and finally deduce that it was the rear cargo bay door that was busting out and like depressurizing the whole cab and causing the thing to pretty much implode on itself and rip into pieces. But that thing's still scary.
Yeah, I've never really cared for the third engine on the like wing in the back. It's always looked stupid to me.
It does kind of look stupid, but at the same time, it was a cost-cutting measure to get past international, well, actually not get past international law, get past flight laws, because at the time, it was actually required by law that if you were trying to conduct transatlantic crossings or any kind of crossing, well, really any kind of international flights that consisted of going Europe or either westward into the Pacific towards East Asia or Australia, that you couldn't have 2 engines on an aircraft. You had to have more than 2, and 4 engines was expensive, and so a cost-cutting measure was to not have 4 engines, but to have 3, so that way you're still within the confines of the law, and also saving costs on fuel, and also maintenance and other things, because 3 engines is a lot cheaper to maintain than 4. And so that's the reason why you would see the DC-10 and also the Lockheed, because at a time, funnily enough, Lockheed Martin also made a passenger aircraft called the TriStar, which is very similar looking. You can actually get the TriStar and the DC-10 mistaken for each other if you don't pay too much attention. It looks very similar in a lot of ways. Honestly, I think that...
Now, I got to say, between this one, the MD versus that Lockheed one, the Lockheed one looks more stupid.
It does.
That wing in the back looks like... That doesn't look very aerodynamic for some reason.
Also, thank you everyone for saying it's ETOPS. It is ETOPS. I don't really get into the names and the terminology of anything, so I'm sorry about that. But I thank y'all for always clarifying that in the live chat. Y'all help me out a lot. But this thing does look dopey. Also, the other thing that makes it look dopey is that stupid looking nose cone. Like, at least the DC-10 looks like a bird. This one looks like some kind of a drunk aardvark or something similar.
Yeah, it looks goofy.
Yeah. Also, that's a good picture to mark a
Oh.
Lockheed TriStar on. But anyways, also that old Delta logo, that thing honestly was pretty cool looking.
Nah, I'm not a fan of that. It looks kind of like, I don't know. I don't like that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see how it is. All right. But anyways, with that, oh wait a minute. Okay, okay, you can't lie. It does kind of look cool.
Okay. Nah.
Okay, maybe Northwestern Airlines. Maybe I can buy you with this one. Northwest Airlines?
No, definitely not.
What? Okay, hang on. United 1970s livery, not Leeds United. United Airlines. How about United, like this livery?
Nah.
What? Okay.
I like what's the airline? United Arab Emirates.
Let's see. You're talking about Emirates Air?
Yeah,
Airlines?
Emirates Air. I think that's the one.
This one.
That's a very clean looking livery. I like that one.
I'll be honest with you. I think the cleanest looking livery out there for an aircraft would be, it's very similar to Emirates. I'm trying to think of what it is though.
Oh, also Virgin Atlantic. They have a really good livery too.
Oh yeah, they do. I like Virgin Atlantic's liveries. They have a really neat looking one.
Yeah, I like that. I like that one.
You know, I gotta be honest with you though. If I had to say a really good livery, Pan Am livery in the 1990s was really cool looking. Let me see if I can find you a picture of it. This right here, like the revamped Pan Am livery. They had these for a very short amount of time before the company went defunct. But I
know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the what's it called? Chinese KLM. It reminds me of that livery.
KLM, but KLM's solid blue.
It's kind of blue too. Like
no, I mean like KLM is solid blue. Like it's a blue
okay.
plane.
I think I had a different idea.
Yeah,
in my head.
that's not KLM. KLM is like literally the inverse of this. But man, I mean like look at that though. That was a cool airline. Also, did you know this, Mandy? But all of their aircraft were called Clippers. Like they were called something Clipper because when Pan Am started, they actually flew nothing but a fleet of Boeing 314s. Which they call Clipper ships because they were flying boats, and so they always had to fly into a harbor.
Interesting. That is that thing right there. That is that the Spruce Goose?
No, Spruce Goose was a lot bigger than that, man. And
I said that as to troll, by the way.
Also, someone said Spirit Airlines looks pretty striking. You know what else is striking? How they hit the end of that runway. They strike that crap like no one else. Well, actually, Ryanair's got them on that, but let me show the Spirit Airlines. Everyone's talking about, this and that, like with Spirit and, all the other airlines. But man, Spirit, geez, I mean, that's bright. I mean,
I'd be scared to get on one of those airlines like Spirit or what's the other one called? It's one of the budget airlines that's around the United States. I forgot the name of it.
U.S. Airways? I think they went bankrupt, though.
Oh, they weren't. I don't think they were
JetBlue.
budget. Yeah, I'd be scared to get on a JetBlue, a Spirit, or also Southwest. I'd be scared to get on any of those.
Honestly, I don't feel like Southwest is in the same category. But you know what I'm really scared of? Ryanair. Like, I know we're not in Europe, but Ryanair scares the hell out of me because every video you ever see of every single flight that ever flies from Ryanair is that thing slamming into the runway so hard that it's almost about to be the next episode of Air Disasters. Each and every time. It's scary, honestly. And also, like, look at, like, they don't even have TVs in the back of the headsets. Like, it's literally the safety briefing, like, clipboarded onto each seat.
And that wouldn't help you any on your fear factor at all. It's like you get on like a metal coffin with yellow like warning signs all over the place.
Also, I like how, when you get in the crash, you're supposed to lean forward and kind of put your head on the next seat in front of you. But that crap is solid, like hard plastic. Like if that airplane like runs off the runway and it just starts to violently stop because it's hitting grass, you're getting knocked out cold by the safety briefing itself.
Are all the airline seats that low? Because that guy's head is like above the like chair. I don't remember that.
I think they are. I mean, like Ryanair is like a completely short flight kind of airline. They have nothing but 737s, I believe, which even adds to more of the fun because if they're all Maxes, then you know you're just you're just going straight into a nosedive, both the company and you. But you know it's gee, Ryanair is rough. Also, someone said old TWA logo. Maybe you'll like this one. Old TWA logo. Oh man, it's gonna pull up everything but the one I'm trying to find. Let me just type in a TWA constellation. TWA constellation. I think I'll pull it up for you. Yeah, right here. What do you think about that one?
I really can't see it that well.
Oh, one second. I'll try and pull up TWA 707. I think they had 707s. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so here's TWA. Hopefully I'm finding one that does it justice. That right there.
Yeah, isn't that like wait a minute, TWA. Is that the
That's
the
Howard
Twilight
Hughes
Zone,
Airlines.
William Shatner got on the plane, there was that thing out there crawling around on the wing.
I think it was, wasn't it? Wait a minute,
I think
hang
it
on,
was
hang on.
TWA.
Twilight Zone, something on the wing, something in the walls. Like that was the other one. Nightmare at 20,000 feet. Let's go and read the plot. While traveling on an airplane, let's see, and you shot the thing on the wing. But okay, but where's the?
Go to
swear.
images. Go to images. I think you'll see a picture of it.
Ah, the carpet monster.
That was so cheesy.
Honestly,
wait, scroll down, and there might be a picture of it.
Oh man, let's see here. I don't think they ever specified the airline, did they?
There was a wide shot, like right at the very end.
I don't think we're gonna find it. It doesn't look like we're going to find it here, sadly.
Oh man, I could have sworn that I saw TWA somewhere in that episode.
Man. Oh wait a minute. What's this one? Trans East. What the hell?
Oh
That's
man,
like
they made up some junk for that whole episode.
Literally, man, they're going with like that Beppis and Gola stuff, you know, for Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Trans East Airlines. Like, would it really be that hard to have? Well, then again, TWA wouldn't probably want to be associated with a plane that had all the passengers go missing on it or something. So I guess I kind of understand why they couldn't get an airline to agree with that. But still, that's
I also I like how in that episode that William Shatner was literally packing a whole pistol like on the flight, just open fire out the window at the creature.
Remember, he had to get the cop's gun because the cop had the revolver in front of him.
Oh yeah, that's right. He grabbed the marshal's gun and he ran back and pulled the little like emergency tab and opened the window.
You know the one that was funnier to me though with William Shatner, and he gets a lot of credit for this one, but I think the funnier one was when him and that girlfriend went to that gas station and like the little Satan thing was on the table, and they started to live their life around whatever the hell the thing on the table was telling them.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Honestly, that one was funnier because it was just so weird. He was overacting too much. He'd be like, "Oh my god, am I going to get a tumor and die?" And then he'd push the button again. Like I just found that funny. But
this was before he was Captain Kirk, wasn't it?
Yes, all of this was before he was Captain Kirk. Like this was his like upstarting in the career of being an actor kind of stuff right here. And apparently he impressed the right people back then, you know, to get on on Star Trek.
Yeah, apparently so. Although back then Star Trek wasn't that prestigious until like after the fact.
Yeah, that's true. And also if you go back and look at Star Trek, oh goodness. Oh my goodness! You know, like the original series, it was a trailblazer because it set up the whole franchise for the rest of all time. So that way, each generation, everyone can complain it's being run to the ground. But man, the set design and everything, like when you go back and look at all that, this was being run on like $5 a week. Like look at the costumes, like the set. I mean, honestly, Matthew, I don't know why as a kid I thought this looked a lot better than it did, but this just looks cheap as hell. Like in the like now.
It's the better of the Star Treks, and it was the cheaper one too.
Honestly, in my opinion, I think the Next Generation was the best one.
Yeah, somewhat.
I don't know. I just liked the whole cast that they had on the Next Generation. I thought it was a pretty good one. And then all the spinoffs that start happening around the same time. We're about to sit here and talk about Star Trek with like budgeting and stuff and all that and how that worked. But anyways. I really like the original series was pretty good. To me, it's like a second place, but the Next Generation to me was number one. I think it was the golden age of Star Trek. The original series was kind of like it walked so the Next Generation could run, and then honestly, everything else beyond it, except Star Trek Enterprise, I thought Star Trek Enterprise was okay. Everything else beyond it's just kind of been meh. You know, it's not really the greatest. The movies weren't that grand. You know, the movies really you could just forget about them. But I think the Next Generation was the best. That's just me though. But anyways. I think we've been rabbit holing for way too long here. We need to move on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, so moving on to our next one, we have a $2 super chat from Grim Dog. And also, I will pass your comment on to the Enforcer, and thank you very much for your support. And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Darkona Zarkonis, who says, Buggy looks like a Halo Warthog with current tech.
I would say it kind of does, doesn't it? I think that is pretty close. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and also making that pretty cool connection. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again. Also, I just saw Roy CC07 say that he liked Star Trek Voyager. I like Star Trek Voyager, but the character Felix completely killed the show for me. I like the whole cast on Star Trek Voyager. I thought it was a really interesting premise. But the annoying chef character, now nothing wrong with the actor. The actor's actually a really cool guy if you ever watch him on interviews and stuff. But they had a really annoying character for him to play, and I didn't like that much. It really threw off the whole thing for me. And that's why Star Trek Voyager really falls down multiple levels, is because I just didn't like the character Felix. But anyway, and also everyone's saying DS9 is pretty good. DS9 was very good. It was really good. The only problem with DS9 is that the last few seasons, I felt like they really started, like, I think it was the last 2 seasons, they really started to feel like they just started going wherever. Like, it didn't really have a good storyline, to me. But anyways, Matthew's telling me we got to move on, and we kind of do. And so that we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a $2 super chat from Dwayne Porter, who says, it's homemade Southern food. It's pretty good.
And it is, I don't know which homemade Southern food it is, but homemade Southern food is good food. Whatever it is always top notch. And so that, I thank you so much for the support, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and also, Ron Anderson puts in a $2 donation and says, Enforcer, the original is best.
Okay, all right. Well, I say we see what the poll says. What does the poll say, Matthew?
The poll says 34% say original is the best, 25% say next gen, 22% said none of the above, and 19% said both of the above.
Interesting. So it looks like the original series is winning out. And in the plots, I would say it's good. But honestly, it's really just all about the story. It doesn't really matter about the costume and character design. But I still feel like the Next Generation was the one I really liked out of them all. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one. Really interested to see what y'all thought about that.
All right, and finally, we have a $2 super chat from CA Lags, who says, Rocket bye baby.
And oh, man, that's a joke on the sleep. And so,
Yes.
Thank you so much for the support. And rockabye baby, ra-ta-ta-ta. And so, thank you so much once again for the support. And we are now on to the live chats. We're only going to be able to answer about 5 of them due to time constraints. And with that, we are on to the live chats. Also, Brad C just said that Captain Pike is the best Star Trek. And my mom has actually watched Captain Pike. I'd probably watch him if I had time, but I don't. She said it was really good. She also liked what's it called? Star Trek Discovery. I've never watched that one either. I've heard mixed things about it. I've heard some people hate it, some people like it. I don't really know. I'd have to see it for myself. But with that, let's get on to the live chats.
All right, so first up, we have our Morse code decoders of the stream, WF2U, BME, Mark Hodges, CFA, and also William Jones, who say, Enforcer, the plain language telegraph message tonight is, the battles are getting hotter as the weather gets colder. Hope you had a nice Thanksgiving break.
Ding, 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 ding. I didn't include the hope I had a nice Thanksgiving break part. That's wrong. I'm just kidding. And we did have a good Thanksgiving break, and y'all also got that correct again. And it looks like the Russians are trying to heat up the front lines a little bit to see if there's some way that they can maybe try and win something in the winter, although it probably won't happen. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you to all of y'all. Every single one of y'all. There's a lot of Morse code decoders now that continue to decode these messages every single day of the week. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from James Bond, who says, when do you feel that Crimea will fall?
I feel like Crimea will probably start to fall in the early spring of next year. I don't see it happening soon, but I do see it happening at least before April of next year. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Ken Brown, who says, are the Russians building more weapons to use in Ukraine?
Probably not. If you're talking about more modern equipment, no, because the sanctions have cut out their ability to produce any kind of modern equipment to fight the Ukrainians with. And so, in that regard, no. But in terms of small arms like AKs, and also simpler equipment to produce, they are producing that because there's really no limitation on that. As long as they have the raw, simple materials, they can make those. And so, in some categories, no, and in some others, yes. And so I hope that answers the question fairly well. And we are on to the second to last one of the night.
And this one goes to Enigma, who says, how similar are the Rotax engines and drones, like U.S. Predators or Iranian Mohair, or something like that, Can-Am ATVs and jet skis?
Sadly, I hate to say it, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one because I'm not really a gearhead all that much on engines, and so sadly, I don't really know if they're similar or not. I'm sure someone could probably answer that in the live chat, but unfortunately, I don't think I have the knowledge to answer that all too well. And so with that, let's get on to the final question of the night. So who's the lucky last person? They're in the lucky last question of the night.
All right, and that person is Heather Fitzgibbon, who says, how will the orcs count their troops that are dying of hypothermia?
They're probably going to have to count those as just combat fatalities, because they are dying on the front lines. It's just that they're not dying from enemy fire. And so they will either not count them, or if they count them, they'll just be counted as frontline fatalities. Or they might even tell people that's happening. We might have to just guess and assume it's happening if we ever get video footage of people freezing to death in their positions. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And with that, it's time to end tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to answer everyone's questions and also cover the news. If y'all enjoyed this stream tonight and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and also hit the like button if you've been around for a while as a member of the Lee Spring Army. Hitting the like button helps this channel to reach more people and helps the Enforcer channel and the Lee Spring Army to grow. And not only that, but subscribing helps you to keep apprised of when these streams run. Which, rather than the Thanksgiving break we took on Thanksgiving and Black Friday, is every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. We do not run Mondays, but every single day of the week, you can expect us to be on here at the exact same time, covering the war. And so with that, thank you to everyone so much once again for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and to also run a Sunday fundraiser. And so have a great night, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you all then. And also, Slava Ukraini.
Yes. The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. нашу свободу.